Hey there, tonight we're taking a quiet walk through history, though it might not stay quiet for long. Let's be honest, history is never quiet. It's just the screaming is usually in Latin, and the smell is way worse than you think. Honestly, you wouldn't make it an hour out here. Most people today would tap out before sunrise, and that's generous. Survival score. 1 star out of 5, and that star only exists because the Pope hasn't invented a way to excommunicate you through time. Breakfast alone would finish you off, bread that doubles as a weapon, wine that tastes like regret, and a social hierarchy where disagreeing with someone whose hat is taller than yours counts as a mortal sin. The air is incense and unresolved feuds. Even the bees have better legal representation than you. So no, you wouldn't survive. You'd barely even qualify for the attempt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Think of it as a tiny rebellion against the algorithm, which is basically the Holy Roman Empire of the Internet, vast, incomprehensible, and completely indifferent to your personal well-being. Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop your city and hour in the comments. Lower the lights, let the soft whir of a fan set the mood, and together we'll slip into tonight's journey. That fan is our audio hug, our mechanical lullaby drowning out the world. Feel that artificial breeze, let it carry you back to 1075, where the Pope is about to become CEO of Christendom, and absolutely no one owns enough socks. You're perched on a 3-legged stool that wobbles more than your confidence, in a room where the walls breathe cold air like they've been storing winter in the mortar. The Lateran Palace isn't so much a palace as it is a very ambitious stone barn with delusions of grandeur, and right now it's drafty enough to make you consider stealing the scribe's woolen sleeve for warmth. Candlelight shivers across the room, not because anyone's dancing, but because the flames are having a tiny panic attack every time wind sneaks through a window that was probably glazed during the reign of someone whose name you wouldn't pronounce correctly. Across from you, a scribe named Brother Quintilis is scratching away at parchment with a goose quill that's down to its last good feather. His ink smells like iron and crushed oak galls, which is fancy medieval talk for like a mouthful of pennies left in a tree stump. You can see his knuckles are white from gripping the pen, not because he's nervous about the words, but because his fingers are half frozen. The parchment itself is vellum, which means it used to be a calf, and you can't help but think the calf would have been warmer, which is a thought that makes you feel both clever and vaguely guilty. In the corner, Pope Gregory Roman VII is pacing. He's not pacing like you pace when you're waiting for pizza delivery. He's pacing like a man trying to wear a groove in the flagstones deep enough to plant tomatoes. His shadow, thrown by a single tallow candle, stretches across the wall and makes him look 10 feet tall, which is approximately 9 feet taller than he actually is. The effect is impressive, if a little theatrical. You half expect him to produce a prop sword and start soliloquizing. Every few steps, he stops, pivots, and stares at Quintilis's work. Not at the words, but at the space above them, as if the real document exists in a dimension only popes can see. He's muttering in Latin that's too fast for your 1 semester of college Latin to catch, but you catch the rhythm of it. Question, answer, counter-question, emphatic statement that sounds suspiciously like he's winning an argument with himself. The Pope, it turns out, is his own best debate partner. The room itself is a museum of smells. There's the wet dog aroma of damp wool, the sharp vinegar of old wine in a cup that's been refilled but never washed, the iron and vegetable funk of the ink, and underneath it all, the ghost of incense from a mass that happened sometime last week. It's not a good smell, but it's a deep smell. It has layers. It tells a story. The story is mostly we don't have modern ventilation, but it's also we are doing something that matters. Quintillus pauses to re-ink his quill, dipping it into a horn that's balanced precariously on a stack of wax tablets. The tablets are covered in notes. Earlier drafts, maybe, or a shopping list that includes more beeswax and figure out what to do about the Normans. You lean forward, trying to read them without being obvious about it, but the light is too flickery and your Latin is too rusty. You catch the word imperator, emperor, and something that might be depona, which you think means to depose, but could also mean to file away for later, which in papal terms might be the same thing. Gregory stops pacing again. This time he walks over and stands behind Quintillus, his breath smelling faintly of figs and something medicinal. He reads the most recent line aloud, slowly, as if tasting each word. Quod Romanus pontifex salus, he says, and you understand that much, that the Roman pontiff alone. Alone what? You lean in further, trying to see. The next word is imperators. Ah, that. The Pope alone can do something to emperors. The verb is small and sharp, depona. You realize you're watching the moment someone writes the corporate equivalent of the CEO can fire the board of directors, except the board commands armies and the CEO commands. Well, theoretically, all of Christendom, but practically, a lot of angry letters. Quintillus waits, quill hovering. The Pope nods. The scratching resumes. The sound is like dry leaves being walked on by a very determined mouse. You notice the floor is covered in rushes, old ones, which means they're basically a straw carpet that's been composting since Easter. They crunch underfoot in a way that suggests small things have been living in them, possibly holding tiny medieval conventions of their own. The air above them is thick with dust motes that dance in the candlelight like they're trying to form constellations. If you squint, one clump looks a bit like a crown. Another looks like a sword. You're probably projecting, but then again, in a room where a man is literally rewriting the power structure of Europe, maybe the dust is paying attention. Gregory resumes his pacing, and you notice his shoes. They're red, of course, papal red, but the leather is cracked and the soles are thin. He's worn them down walking through these same rooms, through these same arguments, probably through this same existential dread about what happens when the Holy Roman Emperor gets wind of Clause 12. You wonder if there's a cobbler in Rome who specializes in anxiety-induced shoe wear. You wonder if the Pope gets a papal discount. The scribe finishes a line and blows gently on the ink. It's a gesture so familiar, so domestic, that it feels out of place in a room where sovereignty is being redefined. You've done the same thing signing birthday cards. Brother Quintillus has just done it to a document that will eventually get an emperor to stand barefoot in the snow for 3 days. The banality of evil, you think, except it's not evil, it's just paperwork. Paperwork with teeth. Gregory stops at the window. It's dark out, but you can hear Rome breathing, dogs barking, a distant argument in a tavern, the clatter of a cart whose driver is either drunk or has a philosophical objection to cobblestones. The Pope stands there, silhouetted against the night, and you realize he's not looking at Rome. He's looking past it, at the kingdoms beyond, at the bishops who'll resist, at the armies that'll march, at the schisms that'll crack the church like a dropped pot. He's looking at the future, and the future is flickering back at him in candlelight, uncertain and full of shadows. Quintillus dips his quill again. The ink shimmers, black and alive. Gregory turns from the window and says something soft, almost gentle. Quintillus writes it down. The words that will forge a new world order are being written in a room that smells like wet wool and old prayers by a man whose hand is cramping under the supervision of a pope whose shoes are wearing thin. And you're just sitting here, trying not to shiver, wondering if you should have brought a jacket. Morning in Rome arrives like a cat burglar with a cough, subtle, but not nearly as quiet as it thinks it is. The mist rolls over the 7 hills as if the city itself is trying to steam clean its own cobblestones, which frankly could use it. You're walking through it, and the air smells like wet stone, yesterday's fish market, and the peculiar optimism of pilgrims who have convinced themselves that holy dirt smells better than regular dirt. Your shoes, which are essentially leather socks with aspirations, are already soaked. The mud isn't just mud. It's a broth of runoff, donkey droppings, and whatever the tannery uphill decided to donate to the watershed. It sucks at your heels with each step, making a sound like a very small, very disapproving audience. You're beginning to understand why Romans built roads. It wasn't for marching armies, it was for preserving dignity. The streets are a river of people, all flowing in different directions like they've never heard of traffic patterns. Pilgrims in rough wool cloaks jostle past you, clutching lead badges that prove they've touched St. Peter's tomb, or at least touched someone who touched it. They smell like the road, wood smoke, sweat, and the garlic they've been eating since Lucca. One of them is chanting a penitential psalm off-key enough to make the angels consider earplugs. Another is trying to sell you a relic that is very obviously a rabbit's foot with a cross scratched into it. You dodge a cart loaded with clay amphorae of wine. The driver is asleep, or possibly dead. Medieval cart driving is a low-energy occupation, and the mule knows the route better than he does. The cart's left wheel squeaks in a rhythm that matches your own heartbeat, which is either meditative or maddening. You're not sure yet. Probably both. That's Rome for you. Somewhere behind you, a spy from the Holy Roman Empire is trying very hard to look inconspicuous. He's wearing a German cut tunic in a city where that's about as subtle as a neon sign. He's been following you since you passed the Lateran, which you find flattering until you realize he's following everyone who smells like they might have access to parchment. His accent is thick enough to spread on bread, and he's taking mental notes on a wax tablet he keeps dropping. You've seen him bend over to pick it up 3 times now. Espionage is not his strong suit. Existing, perhaps, but not espionage. The mist begins to lift, revealing the Palatine Hill looking like a very old, very tired lion. It's seen better centuries. The forum below it is a marketplace now, because nothing says imperial glory like a stall selling questionable sausages and a man who claims his onions cure gout. You wander through it, stepping over a sleeping dog that has achieved a level of zen you can only dream of. The dog is probably smarter than most of the political theorists you've met this morning. A woman in a veil whispers to you as you pass. She smells like rosewater and conspiracy. The Pope says he can move bishops like chess pieces, she murmurs, eyes darting. But my cousin's a bishop, and he can't even move his own bowels without a permit from the archdeacon. It's the kind of joke that would kill in the right monastic scriptorium. You smile politely, which she takes as encouragement to add. Also, the Pope says he can depose the emperor. I say, have you seen the emperor's army? They have very large swords. The Pope has very large candles. I know which I'd bet on. You keep walking. The mud gets worse. The news travels faster than you do, spreading through the crowd like a rumor about free bread. Everyone's heard something, and no one's heard the same thing. One man is convinced the Pope has declared himself king of the moon. Another thinks the Dictatus is actually a recipe for holy wine that never runs out. A third, who seems suspiciously well-informed, keeps using the word placid, which is Latin for it pleases, which is what cardinals say when they're voting on something that doesn't actually please them at all. You pass the church of San Clement. Its bells are ringing for terce, which is the mid-morning prayer, though the bells sound like they're arguing with each other about the exact time. A pigeon flies out of the belfry with a piece of parchment in its beak. You watch it go, wondering if that's how news is delivered now, by ambitious birds with a flair for the dramatic. The parchment might be a grocery list. It might be a copy of Clause 19. With pigeons, you never know. The smell of rain is stronger now, cutting through the city's usual perfume of incense and unwashed humanity. It smells clean in a way that feels almost revolutionary. You stand on the edge of the Capitoline Hill, looking down at the muddy sprawl, and you can see the tiny figures of messengers on horseback kicking up splashes as they head north. Their satchels are full of letters. Some of those letters contain the 27 clauses. Some contain complaints about the wine. It's impossible to tell which will cause more trouble. A monk brushes past you, muttering about antichrists. He's got a scroll tucked into his robe so hastily that half of it is dragging in the mud, leaving a trail of Latin like a snail trail of scholarship. You could follow it all the way back to his monastery, reading his accidentally published thoughts on papal authority and possibly his recipe for barley soup. History is messy. Literally. The mist has become a drizzle, which is Rome's way of saying it's not going to rain properly, but it's also not going to not rain. It's a commitment issue. You pull your cloak tighter. Well, you try to, but it's more whole than fabric, so you're essentially hugging yourself while a rectangle of wool watches. A child splashes past, barefoot and singing a song about St. Peter that is mostly wrong but very enthusiastic. The mud doesn't bother him. Nothing bothers him. He's probably going to grow up to be either a saint or a warlord. In this century, the Venn diagram overlap is considerable. In a doorway, two men are speaking Greek. That's your cue to listen, because Greek in Rome means either theology or treachery, and sometimes both, like a pomegranate, complicated on the inside. They're talking about the emperor in Constantinople and whether he's heard about the Dictatus yet. One says, he'll laugh. The other says, he'll plot. They both agree he'll do both, which is the Byzantine way. They notice you noticing them and switch to a dialect of Tuscan so thick it might as well be cryptography. You smile and move on. Everyone's a spy today. Even you. You find yourself back near the Lateran. The sun is trying to break through, making the wet cobbles shine like a mosaic made of broken mirrors. A group of pilgrims has gathered around a fountain, filling their flasks. They're discussing whether the Pope's power extends to blessing the water to make it taste less like a public bath. Consensus, no, but it's the thought that counts. One of them asks if you've heard the news. You say you have. They ask what you think. You say you're still thinking about your shoes. They nod like this is a perfectly valid theological position. Because here, in the mist and the mud and the smell of power so new it hasn't even dried yet, that's what everyone's doing, thinking about their shoes. Their material, immediate, rapidly disintegrating shoes. The Pope might be rewriting the rules of heaven and earth, but the street is still muddy. The bread still costs too much. The future is a document in a palace, but the present is a puddle you're about to step in. You step in it. It's cold. The cold puddle was a baptism of sorts. Now you're back inside, and the warmth of the scriptorium hits you like a hug from a woolly mammoth, slightly suffocating but undeniably cozy. Brother Quintillus hasn't moved, which is impressive because you're pretty sure his spine has fused into the shape of a question mark. He's still writing. He'll always be writing. In 1,000 years, archaeologists will find his skeleton still hunched over a parchment, quill in hand, a fossilized scribe with a permanent ink stain on his middle finger that future scholars will interpret as a sacred mark. His hand is trembling. You notice it in the way the quill tip hesitates above the vellum, a tiny vibration that makes the ink pool before it lands, creating letters that are slightly plumper at the start of each stroke, like they've been inflated with a breath. It's not fear. It's not even the cold. It's the 37th hour of continuous writing, which is the medieval equivalent of a marathon where the prize is more writing. Quintillus's fingers are cramping into a claw shape that would make a hawk jealous. He stops, flexes them, each joint cracking like twigs in a fire, and dips the quill again. The ink is blacker than a Catholic guilt dream. It smells like vinegar and old blood, because it basically is. Quintillus made it himself this morning, grinding oak galls with a mortar and pestle that have seen more action than a Viking's axe. He added iron salts, gum arabic, and just a hint of wine, not for quality, but because he ran out of water and the wine was closer. The result is a liquid that writes like silk, but smells like a tavern floor after a theological debate. You lean in, and the fumes make your eyes water. You're getting drunk on literature. The room is thicker with incense than a Vatican gift shop. Someone, maybe Gregory, maybe just the ghost of a very pious previous tenant, has been burning frankincense in a bronze censer that swings from a chain. The smoke coils around the ceiling beams, which are blackened from centuries of this exact ritual. It smells like church, yes, but also like a forest fire in a jewelry box. The scent gets into your hair, your clothes, your pores. You'll be smelling like a sanctified campfire for days. Quintillus writes, Quod salus Romanus pontifex. Only the Roman pontiff. You watch the letters form. The R in Romanus has a flourish that's supposed to look regal, but instead looks like a snail having a seizure. Medieval handwriting is interpretive dance with a quill. The P in pontifex drops below the line like it's trying to escape. The scribe's hand shakes again, and a tiny blot of ink blooms where the X should be. He curses softly in a dialect of Italian that's mostly vowels and blasphemy. He reaches for the pumice stone. Every good scribe has one, for smoothing parchment, and apparently for sanding away mistakes. He rubs the blot gently, but all he does is spread it into a grey smudge that looks like a tiny storm cloud over the word pontiff. He sighs. In the margin, he draws a tiny hand pointing at the smudge, a medieval footnote that says, "This is not my fault. Argue with the ink." You've made the same gesture in important emails. The candle has burned down 2 inches while you've been watching. Wax drips onto the table, where it's joined a waxscape of previous candles, forming a miniature Alps of hardened tallow. You could probably carbon date each layer to a different crisis. That peak there, that's from the time Gregory declared simony a sin. That valley, probably the week everyone was just arguing about lentil rations. The current candle is guttering, its flame performing a tiny death spiral every time someone exhales too hard. Quintillus moves on to the next clause. You recognize it from the whispers in the street. The Pope's name alone shall be spoken in churches worldwide. You imagine every priest in Christendom tripping over that one. It's the medieval equivalent of a corporate rebranding where everyone has to say the CEO's name before every meeting. In the name of the Father, the Son, and Gregory. It doesn't flow. The scribe's wrist is at a 90-degree angle that would make an orthoptist weep. He's supporting his writing hand with his left hand, which is also cramping. It's a house of cards made of muscle spasms. You consider offering to massage his shoulders, but you're not sure if that's allowed. There are no HR guidelines in the 11th century. There are just traditions, and traditions are suspicious of shoulder massages from strangers. He dips the quill again, and a drop of ink falls onto his sleeve. It spreads through the undyed wool like a secret, making a constellation that looks like a plague doctor and a donkey having an argument. He doesn't notice. He's focused on the next word, depona. To depose, the verb that started a war. He writes it carefully, each letter a soldier in an army of legal Latin. The D is firm. The E is elegant. The P looks like it's trying to hide. The rest are just trying to get through the day. The mystery arrives quietly, as mysteries often do. Between clause 12 and clause 14, because superstition has skipped 13, there's a space. Not a large space, a breath, a pause. You see it before Quintillus does, a tiny hesitation in the ink flow, a place where the quill lifted and the hand shook not with fatigue but with something else. Doubt, fear. A moment where the scribe looked at the words and wondered if he was copying a prayer or a death sentence. You'll never know. The space is smaller than a fingernail, but it feels like a canyon. History is written by the trembling hands of men who may not believe what they're writing. Quintillus notices the gap. He frowns. He fills it with a tiny flower, a doodle so small you'd need a magnifying glass made of faith to see it properly. It's not in the original. It's his own addition, a bit of beauty in a desert of legalism. It's also heresy, technically. You're watching a man commit artistic rebellion in the margins of absolute power, and the power will never know. The incense censer swings. The candle gutters. Quintillus's hand shakes. The Pope is still pacing somewhere, his shadow growing shorter as the sun. Yes, there's sun now. The mist has burned off, comes through the window and reminds everyone that time exists, and lunch does not. You look at the parchment. It's covered in words that will outlive everyone in this room. They'll be debated, translated, weaponized, and eventually displayed in a museum where people will glance at them while thinking about where to get coffee. But right now, they're just wet ink on calf skin, written by a man whose fingers are freezing in a room that smells like a monastery got into a fight with a brewery. Quintillus flexes his hand again. This time, the cracking sounds like a small tree falling in a forest that definitely makes a sound because you're right here hearing it. He dips the quill for what must be the 100th time. The ink is getting low. He's getting low. The candle is a puddle. The Pope's shadow has disappeared from the wall. Maybe he's gone to lunch. Maybe he's gone to pray. Maybe he's just stepped into a different shadow where the rules are still being written. And you're still here, breathing in incense and ink, watching a trembling hand forge a new world order one aching letter at a time. The tapestry you're hiding behind smells like centuries of mutton grease and the velvet farts of long dead courtiers. It's supposed to depict the ascension, but someone in the weaving workshop had a sense of humor, so Christ is floating upward with an expression that clearly says, "I'm getting out of here before the bill arrives." The apostles at his feet look like they've just been told the wine is watered. It's the perfect backdrop for a conspiracy, or at least for avoiding awkward small talk with people who think bathing is a seasonal activity. On the other side of the threadbare miracle, Emperor Henry Roman IV is laughing. It's a good laugh, booming, confident, the laugh of a man who has never once questioned whether he's the main character. He's 25 years old, which in emperor years makes him basically a teenager with an army, and he's celebrating something. Maybe a successful hunt, maybe a successfully digested breakfast. Maybe just the fact that he's emperor, it's Tuesday, and the roast boar is actually edible for once. The hall is a cathedral of smoke and noise. Torches are jammed into iron sconces, their flames doing the cha-cha every time someone walks past too quickly. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat, spilled ale, and the collective body odor of 50 German nobles who think perfume is for French people. Long tables sag under the weight of food. There's bread that could double as a siege weapon, sausages that look like medieval artillery, and something stewing in a pot that might be cabbage or might be a very sad unicorn. You can't tell. The lighting is terrible. A minstrel is plucking a lute in the corner, but his fingers are so numb from the draft that he keeps hitting the wrong strings, creating a melody that sounds like a cat walking on a harp. No one notices. They're too busy shouting over each other about whose lands are whose, which bishop is being troublesome, and whether the new pope has finally realized that popes are supposed to be decorative, not functional. The consensus at the high table seems to be that Gregory Roman VII is a bit of a keener, a try-hard, a man who read the job description and actually took it seriously. Fools, the lot of them. Henry is halfway through a joke about a bishop, a donkey, and a bag of gold florins when the messenger arrives. The messenger is small, mud-spattered, and looks like he's been ridden harder than his horse. He's clutching a leather satchel that's been waxed so many times it shines like a beetle's back. He stops at the door, breathing hard, and the nearest guard, who is approximately the size of a small barn, raises an eyebrow that suggests the messenger should have sent a raven instead. But the messenger has something ravens don't, a papal seal. He pulls it out, holding it up like it's a magic talisman. It might be. The eyebrow lowers. The guard steps aside. The messenger walks forward, his boots leaving mud prints on the rushes, which is the medieval equivalent of tracking dirt across someone's white carpet and not even having the decency to look sorry. Henry sees him. The laugh dies faster than a torchlight in a draft. Your phrase exactly, and you feel a strange pride at being so prescient. The emperor's face goes from jovial to someone just told me my favorite hunting dog died in the time it takes to unroll a scroll. He motions the messenger forward. The hall quiets, not because anyone has manners, but because this is better than the lute player. Even the minstrel stops, his fingers frozen mid-pluck. The messenger kneels. He presents the satchel. Henry takes it. The wax seal is warm, as if it's been pressed by a hand that was recently in prayer or recently holding a very hot tea. Henry breaks it with his thumb, a gesture so casual it feels like an insult. He pulls out the parchment. It's thin, translucent in the torchlight. You can see his fingers through it. They're trembling just a little, but you catch it because you're looking for it. Behind the tapestry, your own breath fogs the threads. He raids. In the silence, you can hear the parchment rustle. It sounds like dry leaves being read their last rites. Henry's eyes move left to right, tracking the Latin. His lips move silently. You see him reach the part about deposition. His jaw tightens. The boar on the table seems to notice because it shifts slightly, as if trying to roll away from the tension. The unusual detail arrives on a silver platter, literally. A servant, unaware that history is happening, tries to offer Henry a stuffed swan. It's a dish so elaborate it has its own feathered hat. Henry doesn't look up. He just extends one hand, palm out, in a gesture that means, if you come any closer with that bird, I will make you wear it. The servant freezes. The swan wobbles. The moment stretches. Henry finishes reading. He rolls the parchment back up, tighter than it arrived. He taps it against his knuckles, a rhythm that could be a nervous tick or could be Morse code for someone is about to lose their head. He looks at his advisors. They look at him. The silence is so thick you could spread it on the stale bread. Then he laughs. It's a different laugh this time. Higher, sharper, the laugh of a man who has just realized the joke is on him and the punchline is written in papal bulls. He says something in German too fast for your Duolingo progress to decipher, but the tone is clear. He thinks this is ridiculous. He thinks Gregory is mad. He thinks, though he doesn't say it, that this is going to be a problem. He stands. The chair scrapes backward, a sound like a sword being drawn from a stone. He slaps the parchment onto the table next to the suspicious stew. "Well," he says in Latin, for the benefit of the messenger, "tell His Holiness that I am deeply moved. And also tell him that my army is also deeply moved, very deeply, with swords." The messenger, to his credit, does not faint. He bows and backs away, stepping in his own mud prints as if trying to erase his presence. Henry watches him go, then turns to his advisors. "All right," he says, his voice cheerful in a way that makes your spine think about leaving the room. "Who wants to explain to me how a monk from Savannah thinks he can tell me what to do?" The advisors look at each other. The one on the left, who has a beard that could house birds, clears his throat. "Your Majesty, the Pope is not merely a monk. He is the vicar of Christ." Henry picks up a chicken leg. "And I am the Emperor. Christ and I can have a conversation about vicars without a memo." He bites into the chicken. The sound echoes. You shift your weight behind the tapestry. It smells worse up close. The threadbare ascension sways, and for a moment, Christ's embroidered face lines up with Henry's real one, both of them looking like they're questioning their life choices. Then the moment passes. The feast resumes, but quieter now, like a party where someone just mentioned the plague. The mystery lingers in what Henry does next. He doesn't burn the parchment. He doesn't throw it. He tucks it into his belt, next to a dagger with a jeweled hilt. The two objects knock together as he walks, papal authority and imperial steel, having a quiet conversation. Which one wins? The tapestry doesn't know. The swan doesn't know. Even the Holy Roman Emperor, with all his laughter and all his power, isn't sure yet. But you are. You saw his hand tremble. The seal is still warm when it comes into your hands, which is either a miracle of transubstantiation or just really impressive postal service. It's a disk of beeswax the color of late afternoon sunlight on a dusty road, and it's humming. Not literally. Wax doesn't hum except when it does, which is now. You can feel it through your fingertips, a vibration so subtle it might be your own pulse echoing back at you, amplified by holiness and a frankly excessive amount of tree resin. It's the first piece of technology you've encountered here that isn't trying to kill you, and you're not sure how to feel about that. You're standing in what passes for a mailroom in the Lateran Palace, which is essentially a closet that someone important forgot to lock. The room is lined with pigeonholes, actual pigeonholes, though the pigeons have been evicted and replaced with rolls of parchment that smell like ambition and mold. The seal sits in your palm like a coin from a kingdom that hasn't been invented yet. On one side, there's the image of St. Peter, fishing. On the other, the name Gregoriv's Papa, which looks like it's shouting even in Latin. The fisherman and the Pope, pressed into wax by a silver matrix that is currently cooling on a cushion of velvet the color of cardinal sin. The unusual detail arrives with the bees. Gregory, it turns out, keeps his own hives on the palace roof. Not for honey, though the honey is excellent, dark and sharp, like it's been steeped in theological argument, but for wax. The Lateran bees are a special breed, descended from a swarm that once settled on the tomb of St. Paul. At least, that's what the beekeeper monk tells you. He's missing 3 fingers and has a look in his eye that suggests he trusts the bees more than he trusts the Pope, which is probably wise. The wax, he explains, is purified over 3 days, filtered through linen blessed by the archdeacon, and mixed with a secret ingredient from the Byzantine Empire that makes it harder than a saint's skull. You wonder if the secret ingredient is just more beeswax, but you don't ask. Some mysteries are sacred. Some are just good branding. The seal itself is a piece of political theatre. When Gregory presses it, the matrix is warmed over a brazier, the wax is dripped onto the parchment's ribbon, and the matrix is pushed down with the authority of a man who thinks God is watching and probably grading his technique. It makes a sound. Not a click, not a thump, but a soft th-lop, like a kiss from a very solemn fish. That sound, you realize, is the sound of power being applied. It's the sound of this is official now. It's the sound of 27 clauses becoming 27 problems for 24 kings and a whole lot of bishops. You hold the seal up to the light from the arrow-slit window. It's translucent at the edges, and you can see tiny bubbles trapped inside, each one a miniature air pocket from the lungs of a bee that died in service of papal supremacy. You picture the bee buzzing around a lavender bush, thinking bee thoughts. Flower, Parlin Queen, maybe a little dance later, and then ending up as a component in international law. It's a better legacy than most. The mystery is in the crack, not a crack in the seal itself. The wax is flawless, or as flawless as something made by monks who measure things in holy finger widths can be. No, the crack is in the matrix, the silver stamp. You see it when the light hits just right, a hairline fracture running through Peter's left ear. It's old. It's deliberate. Or maybe it's just wear and tear from pressing authority onto paper 1,000 times. But you wonder, did someone drop it? Did Gregory himself damage it in a fit of rage after an especially frustrating letter from Henry? Or is it a flaw passed down from a previous pope, a tiny imperfection that makes each seal slightly different, a secret signature for God to notice and everyone else to ignore? The beekeeper monk coughs. It's warm because the Pope's hand was warm, he says, and then quieter, or because the Holy Spirit has poor circulation. He grins with the half of his mouth that still has teeth. You grin back. This is the kind of joke that would get you both excommunicated if said louder, but here in the mailroom closet, it's just a shared truth. Holiness is sweaty work. You press the seal gently with your thumb. It gives, just a little, like a firm handshake from a man who's trying not to break your bones. The warmth is fading now, cooling from body temperature to room temperature to the temperature of a stone in a forgotten chapel. But while it lasts, it feels like you're holding a live thing, a creature made of wax and willpower. It wants things. It wants to be attached to something important. It wants to be seen. It wants to cause trouble, and it will. You can see it in your mind's eye, the seal arriving in Burgundy, where the Duke will stare at it and wonder if his loyalty to the Emperor is worth more than his soul. The seal landing in Canterbury, where the Archbishop will press his own, less authoritative seal next to it, a visual argument on parchment. The seal in Constantinople, where the Patriarch will laugh, then stop laughing, then write a very long, very angry letter in Greek that no one in Rome will read because they're all too busy being Latin. The wax has a smell, too, underneath the incense and the dank stone of the mailroom. It smells like honey and smoke and something metallic, like coins left in the sun. It's the smell of money, of value, of something worth forging. You think about forgeries. Everyone will think about forgeries. How do you fake a seal? You'd need the matrix or a copy of it. You'd need the right bees. You'd need the secret Byzantine ingredient, or you'd need a really talented monk with a steady hand and flexible morals. The possibilities are endless. The consequences are too. You hand the seal back to the beekeeper monk, who tucks it into a leather pouch with the reverence of a man handling a holy relic that's also a fire hazard. He shuffles off to store it in the archive, where it will sit next to 1,000 other seals, each one a time bomb that already exploded somewhere in history. You stay in the mailroom, listening to the pigeons that aren't there anymore cooing in your imagination. The seal's warmth is gone from your palm, but the hum remains. It's in your bones now, a low-frequency buzz that says you were there when power was warmed over a brazier and pressed into wax. It's a story you'll tell, or would tell, if anyone would believe you. But the best stories are the ones you only tell yourself, late at night, when the fan is humming, and the darkness smells faintly of incense and long-forgotten bees. The hum of the seal follows you up the stairs, a phantom buzzing in your palm that only stops when you push open the door to the scriptorium, and the real hum of midnight debate takes over. It's a sound like bees, actually, but angrier and more philosophical. The room is a cave of candlelight, each flame a tiny sun orbiting around a central table where 3 monks are arguing about God, kings, and whether honeyed mead counts as a sacrament. It doesn't, but they're voting on it anyway. The Benedictines are named Brother Ambrose, Brother Cuthbert, and Brother Godric, which sounds like the setup to a very niche joke. Ambrose is the fat one, which in a monastery means he's the one who's good at negotiating with the kitchen. Cuthbert is the thin one, which means he reads too much and chews his food like it's a theological problem. Godric is the one who looks like he's made of twigs and quiet fury, the kind of monk who could fast for 40 days and then lecture you about it for 40 more. They're all hunched over a copy of the Dictatus, which is laid out between them like a dangerous animal they're trying to decide whether to pet. Ambrose pours the mead. It comes from a ceramic jug glazed with a pattern of fish that might be Christian symbolism or might just be the potter's favorite animal. The mead itself is the color of candlelight and moves like liquid amber in the cup. It smells of wildflowers and fermented secrets. Honey from the Abbey's own hives, Ambrose says, as if that explains everything. Bees that have prayed the hours with us. They know the Psalms by heart, or by proboscis, whatever bees have. You take a cup. It's warm. Everything is warm here, despite the stone walls that leak cold like a sieve. The monks have solved the heating problem by being in a constant state of argument, which generates enough hot air to keep the room toasty. They've also solved the lighting problem by using candles made from the same bees that make the honey, so the room smells like a cathedral inside a birthday cake. Cuthbert points at clause 12 with a finger that's stained with ink from the 7th century. He's been copying manuscripts so long that his fingerprints have been replaced by Latin abbreviations. It says the Pope can depose emperors. That's clear. But does it mean he can release any subject from any oath? Because that's, he stops, searching for a word that won't get him excommunicated. That's a lot of releasing, Godric snorts. It's a sound like a horse expressing skepticism. It means what it means. The Pope is the vicar of Christ. Christ can release you from anything. Ergo, the Pope can release you from your promise to count whatever to provide 3 nights and a turnip every Michaelmas. That's not how feudalism works, Cuthbert says, which is the medieval equivalent of saying that's not how gravity works. If the Pope breaks every oath in Christendom, we'll have anarchy. And not the good kind where people share everything, the bad kind where they set everything on fire. Ambrose takes a long drink of mead. The Pope could release me from my oath of poverty. I'd like that. I'd like a second cup of mead and maybe a chicken leg. Do we have chicken legs? I feel like we should have chicken legs. Cuthbert ignores him. The word is depona. It can mean to depose. It can also mean to lay down, as in lay down a burden, or a sword, or a responsibility. It's ambiguous. He taps the parchment. The ink is still slightly tacky. You could stick a finger to it and pull up a little string of Latin, like linguistic mozzarella. Godric leans in. His eyes are so close to the candle that you worry his eyebrows will catch fire. Ambiguity is the devil's dictionary. The Pope means what the Pope means. The question is, does he mean what we think he means, or does he mean something else that we'll only figure out after 3 schisms and a crusade? The unusual detail reveals itself in the margins. While the main text is in a formal Caroline minuscule, the monks have been adding their own notes in a private shorthand they developed after years of copying together. It's not Latin anymore. It's a language of squiggles, arrows, and tiny drawings of disgruntled faces. Next to clause 12, someone has drawn a stick figure with a crown falling off its head. The crown is labeled Henricus. The stick figure is labeled Oh No. You ask about the shorthand. Ambrose beams. It's for efficiency, also for complaining. Takes too long to write this is theological nonsense in full Latin. We just draw a frowny face with a halo that's slipping. The mystery arrives with the ink. They've been using a different batch tonight, a special reserve they save for documents that might outlive them. It's mixed with a drop of myrrh, which makes it smell like Christmas and death at the same time. But there's something else in it. Cuthbert claims it's a pigment from the East, a powder that shifts color in different light. In the candle's glow, the words look black. But when you tilt the parchment toward the moonlight streaming through the narrow window, clause 12 flickers, it looks almost red, as if the ink itself is blushing or bleeding. Is that normal, you ask? The monks exchange glances. It's Cuthbert says, which is not comforting. The supplier said it was made from crushed lapis, but I think it's just very enthusiastic beetle shells. He says this while drinking mead from a cup that has a hairline crack running through the glaze. Nothing here is whole. Everything is held together by habit and honey. Godric pours himself another cup. The real question isn't whether the Pope can release oaths. It's whether anyone will listen. My brother's a knight in Lombardy. He swore to the emperor. He's not going to wake up one morning and say, well, the Pope released me, so I guess I'll go home and take up knitting. He'd rather fight the Pope. He'd rather fight me. Would he win? Ambrose asks, genuinely curious. Depends on whether I had more mead. The debate circles back on itself, like a dog chasing its tail while quoting canon law. They argue the same points, pour the same mead, dip the same quill. The candle burns lower. The shadows get longer. The words on the parchment seem to shift, not just in color but in meaning. Release, depose, liberate, destroy. They're all the same word if you squint hard enough or drink enough fermented bee juice. You notice that the moonlight has moved across the page and is now illuminating a different clause entirely. Clause 19, the one about the Pope being judged by no one. The lapis beetle ink glows there too, but softer, like it's embarrassed. The monks don't notice. They're still stuck on 12, like a needle in a groove, like a soul in purgatory. Ambrose refills your cup without asking. The thing about bees, he says, which is how all good theological arguments start, is they'll follow the queen anywhere, even off a cliff. Is that loyalty or stupidity? Yes, says Cuthbert, which is the answer of a man who has given up on binary thinking. Outside, a night bird calls. Inside, the debate continues, and you realize that this is how history happens. not in grand halls with trumpets, but in small rooms where tired men drink honeyed mead and argue about whether one man can untie the knots that bind an empire together. The answer, probably, is yes. But the knots were tied by other men who also drank mead and also argued, and they'll be damned if they let some pope from Tuscany undo their handiwork. You drink your mead. It tastes like power. It tastes like bees. It tastes like a question that won't be answered until someone gets deposed, and even then, not really. The balcony is a stone tongue sticking out of the Lateran's face, tasting the wind that comes down from the Apennines like a cold soup nobody ordered. You're leaning on the parapet, which is exactly as uncomfortable as it sounds. Rough-hewn marble that was probably smooth when Julius Caesar was a toddler, now pitted and worn and determined to leave a fossil of itself on your forearms. Gregory stands beside you. He's not pacing for once. He's just waiting. It's a kind of stillness that feels practiced, like he's been rehearsing it in private moments, preparing for the exact second when history would need him to look dramatically pensive. Below, Rome spreads out in a mosaic of terracotta and trouble. The sun is setting, which means it's painting everything the color of a faded papal cloak, that particular red that's gone through too many washings and too many wars. The Tiber is a ribbon of molten copper. The 7 hills look like sleeping giants who have rolled over one too many times and crushed the suburbs. It's beautiful in the way that ruins are beautiful, peaceful, because the screaming stopped a long time ago. But the screaming is about to start again, and it will start with birds. The ravens are in cages, which are in a cart, which is being wheeled onto the balcony by 2 monks who look like they've drawn the short straw in a very long monastery. The cages are wicker, tightly woven, and each one hums with a dark, impatient intelligence. These aren't your average dumpster ravens. These are the Lateran ravens, which means they've been trained by a hermit who lives on the roof and communicates exclusively in cores and riddles. The hermit's name is Brother Corvinus, which is either a coincidence or the best nominative determinism you've seen since you met a blacksmith named Hammer. He's not here now. He has a knee that predicts rain, and it's been throbbing since Tuesday, which means he's down in the kitchens with a poultice and a sense of betrayal at the weather. Gregory nods at the cages. Open them. The monks hesitate. One of them, a novice named Peter, there are 17 Peters in the Lateran. It's a branding issue, raises a hand like he's in school. Your Holiness, should we not pray first? Gregory looks at him. It's a look that has deposed bishops and made cardinals reconsider their life choices. The ravens have already prayed. They're birds. They're closer to God than we are. They've been chanting the hours since dawn. You just can't understand them because you're not listening properly. Peter the novice nods like this makes perfect sense, which, compared to most things in the 11th century, it kind of does. The cages are opened. The ravens do not fly out immediately. They step out, one claw at a time, like gentlemen leaving a gentleman's club that has just run out of brandy. There are 6 of them, each the size of a small cat and twice as judgmental. Their feathers are so black they look blue in the dying light, like they've been dipped in ink made from crushed midnight. They hop onto the parapet and arrange themselves in a line that is somehow perfectly even, as if they've been measuring distances with their beaks. Gregory has trained them well, or God has, or Brother Corvinus has, using a combination of prayer and the promise of very high-quality carrion. Each raven has a message tube tied to its leg with a red thread. The tubes are tiny, hollow bones from something large and unfortunate, maybe a boar, maybe a former messenger who asked too many questions. Inside, each tube is a roll of parchment no bigger than your pinky finger. The parchment is so thin you could raid through it if you held it up to a very bright sin. The writing on it is microscopic, the work of Quintilus's assistant, a monk named Microscopus, which isn't his real name but is what everyone calls him because he's 5 feet tall and writes in letters the size of flea footprints. He uses a single hair from a horse's tail as a quill. His eyesight is legendary. He claims he can see angels. Everyone assumes he just needs better sleep. The messages are the 27 clauses, not all of them. There isn't enough room and the ravens have a weight limit. Just the highlights. The Pope can depose emperors. The Pope can release oaths. The Pope can judge everyone but be judged by no one. The greatest hits, pressed onto parchment smaller than a grocery list and tied to a bird that might decide to eat it instead. Gregory steps forward. The ravens turn their heads in unison, a motion so synchronized it's either divine choreography or they've been practicing. He speaks to them in Latin, but it's the simple Latin you'd use for children or animals or especially dense bishops. Go north, he says. Find the bishops. Find the abbots. Find anyone who can read and has a vested interest in not being excommunicated. Do not stop for worms. Do not stop for wolves. Do not stop for the emperor's falcons, though they will try to stop you. The ravens listen. Or they don't. It's hard to tell with ravens. They have the expression of creatures who know all the secrets and have signed NDAs with the devil. The first raven lifts off. Its wings snap like wet sails in a sudden gust. The sound is sharp, violent, like a book being slammed shut on a heretic. It catches the wind and rises, and you see the message tube glinting on its leg like a tiny piece of jewelry. The second follows, then the third. Each wingbeat is a small thunderclap. They circle once over the Lateran courtyard, a black spiral that makes the stray dogs below howl in what is either religious ecstasy or pure confusion. Then they turn north, toward the Alps, toward Germany, toward Henry. The fourth raven hesitates. It looks at Gregory. It looks at you. It cocks its head, a gesture so human you expect it to ask for directions. Then, instead of flying north, it flies east, toward the Apennines, toward the sea, toward Constantinople. Gregory sees it. His jaw tightens. That one's for the Patriarch, he says, but you can hear the question in his voice. Did I tell it to do that? Did Corvinus? Or did the bird make its own decision? The mystery is simple and unanswerable. Did the wrong raven get the wrong message? Did the right raven decide the Patriarch needed to hear the news more urgently? Or is there a seventh clause, unwritten, that says, and the birds shall do as they please, for they answer to a higher power that does not concern itself with human politics? The raven disappears into the dusk, a black speck against a blacker sky, and you'll never know if it's carrying salvation or a recipe for barley soup that got mixed up in the scriptorium. The last two ravens launch themselves with a force that nearly knocks Peter the novice off the balcony. They fly low over the city, skimming rooftops, and you can hear the sound of their wings echoing off the tiles. Rome below is a maze of firelight and shadow, and the ravens are navigating by memories older than the city itself. They remember when these hills were just hills. They remember when the Pope was just a fisherman. They remember everything, which is why they look so unimpressed. Gregory watches them go until they're just darts, then specks, then nothing. The wind picks up, colder now, carrying the smell of snow from the Alps. It smells like iron and distance and the silence that happens before armies march. There, he says, and his voice is softer than you've heard it. Let the wind carry it. Let the birds deliver it. Let God sort it out. He turns to go inside, but pauses. They'll freeze out there, he says, not to you, not to anyone. The peaks are colder than Henry's heart, but they'll make it. They always do. He touches the stone parapet and his fingers come away with frost, or they don't. And then we send more ravens. That's how this works. You keep sending birds until one comes back with an answer, or until you run out of birds. You stay on the balcony as the sky darkens. The first stars appear, pinpricks in a cloth that's been washed too many times. Somewhere over the Alps, 6 ravens are flying through darkness, carrying claims that will freeze relations, that will turn allies into enemies, that will make bishops choose between their crowns and their souls. You can imagine them, black against the white peaks, their wings snapping in the thin air like flags in a hurricane. The mystery is this: you don't know if the messages will arrive. You don't know if they'll be read. You don't know if the ravens are loyal or just well-fed. But you know they're gone, and you know they won't come back the same. The wind has them now. The wind and the cold and the absolute, terrifying certainty that somewhere, someone is reading Clause 12 and deciding whether to obey or to fight. The Tiber flows below, indifferent. The city breathes smoke and prayer. The bees in their hives are asleep. And the ravens fly north, their wings snapping like wet sails, carrying the Pope's ambition into the frozen dark. The throne is less a throne and more a very ambitious stool that's been to too many church councils. It's made of oak, which sounds impressive until you realize that oak, after 400 years of bishoply anxiety, becomes about as comfortable as a stack of unanswered theological questions. The seat is grooved by centuries of squirming. The armrests are worn to a polish by elbows that have propped up men weighing the relative merits of heresy versus unemployment. It's a piece of furniture that has seen more moral compromise than a confessional booth at a tax collector's convention. You're sitting 3 rows back from it, on a bench that's even worse. Your bench is pine, which is medieval for we gave up. It wobbles on uneven legs, and every time someone shifts, it sounds like it's giving a tiny, dismayed sigh. The synod is being held in the Lateran's audience hall, a room that's trying very hard to be impressive, but is mainly drafty. The walls are painted with saints who look like they regret their life choices. The ceiling is a mosaic of Christ in majesty, but the gold tiles have started falling off, so Christ looks like he's balding in a very holy way. The bishop currently occupying the throne of existential dread is named Hildebert. He's from somewhere in Burgundy, which means he's used to wine that costs more than his soul, and is currently very confused about why he's in Rome being told that his soul is now a rental property. He's been reading the Dictatus for an hour, aloud, because everything in a synod has to be allowed, even the parts that make you wish you were deaf. His voice has the cadence of a man reciting his own obituary. Quod salus Romanus pontifex, he reads, and you can see the moment the words hit his brain. His eyes widen. He looks at the words, then at Gregory, who is sitting in the actual papal throne, which is on a dais raised exactly 3 steps above Hildebert's seat. 3 steps doesn't sound like much, but in ecclesiastical politics, it's the difference between I have a direct line to God and God has me on hold. Hildebert squirms. The throne groans in solidarity. It's a sound like a tree giving up on being a tree and deciding to become a memory instead. The bishop shifts his weight, and the throne shifts with him, its joints complaining in wooden whispers. This is a man who has just realized that his authority, the authority he inherited from his predecessor, who inherited it from his, who probably bought it from someone who knew someone who met St. Peter's 3rd cousin. That authority is now a subscription service. Rome controls the auto-renewal. Gregory watches him with the patience of a man who has been waiting for this exact facial expression his entire pontificate. It's a look that says, yes, I know you're uncomfortable. That's the point. The furniture is a metaphor. Sit with it. The unusual detail arrives in the form of a cushion. There's a cushion on Hildebert's throne, a small, sad square of red velvet that has been in place since the time of Pope Leo Roman IX. It's stuffed with horsehair, and according to whispered legend, the ashes of an Arian heretic who was burned for denying the Trinity, but whose remains were too uncomfortable to waste. Hildebert keeps adjusting it, pulling it forward, pushing it back, trying to find the sweet spot where his dignity aligns with his tailbone. He never finds it. No one ever finds it. The cushion is a memento mori in upholstery form. You will sit here, you will be uncomfortable, and you will remember that popes outrank cushions. The debate has been circling Clause 12 again, because Clause 12 is the party guest that won't leave. Hildebert's own archdeacon, a thin man named Everwin who looks like he's been fasting since birth, stands up and asks, but does the Pope's power to depose extend to bishops who were appointed by kings, blessed by popes, and have already spent the cathedral's building fund on a very nice chalice? Everwin has a point. The chalice is genuinely nice. You've seen it. It's gold, it's big, and it's currently being used as a flower pot in the cathedral's side chapel because no one can agree if it's been properly consecrated. It's the theological equivalent of a designer handbag you bought on sale but can't wear because you're not sure if it's real. Gregory leans forward. The papal throne doesn't creak. It's made of marble, which is the universe's way of telling you that some seats are permanent and some are very much not. The Pope's power, he says, his voice quiet enough that everyone has to lean in, is like the Tiber. It flows from a source that is not of this world. You may dam it, you may divert it, you may drink from it, but you do not control its beginning or its end. Your authority, Bishop Hildebert, flows from Rome, like borrowed wine. Drink deeply, but remember whose cellar you're raiding. It's a beautiful metaphor. It's also a threat wrapped in poetry and tied with a red ribbon of plausible deniability. Hildebert's face goes through several emotions, none of them joyful. He lands on resigned, which is what you feel when you realize the cushion is winning. The mystery sits in the corner of the hall, shrouded in incense smoke that the thurifer keeps waving around even though no one is praying anymore. It's a question that no one will ask out loud. If the Pope can depose the Emperor, and the Pope can judge everyone, and the Pope's authority is absolute, what happens when the Pope dies? Does the power evaporate? Does it pass to the next Pope like a hereditary disease? Or is there a moment, just a breath, just a heartbeat, where no one is in charge and all the oaths that were released flutter back like pigeons who have remembered where home is? Hildebert stands. The throne creaks one final, triumphant note, as if to say, I survived you. He bows to Gregory, a low bow that says, I acknowledge your power and my own profound discomfort. Then he turns and walks out, his robes swishing like a curtain being drawn on his own autonomy. The synod continues. Another bishop takes the throne of inadequacy. The cushion is fluffed. The debate moves to Clause 14, which is about the Pope's power to transfer bishops. Someone suggests that this could be useful for getting rid of the Bishop of Naples, who snores. Someone else points out that the Bishop of Naples is 80 and deaf, and probably wouldn't notice if he were transferred to Constantinople. The discussion devolves into a list of which bishops could be moved where, like a game of ecclesiastical musical chairs where the music is Gregorian chant and the chairs are on fire. You stay on your bench. It wobbles. You wobble with it. The wood is warm now, from the collective body heat of centuries of people who sat here and wondered if they were on the right side of history. The answer, usually, was not yet. The cushion, you notice, has a small stain on one corner. Wine, maybe, or blood, or just the accumulated sweat of men who have realized their power was never really theirs. It's shaped like a mitre, which is the pointy hat bishops wear. You wonder if that's a coincidence. You suspect it isn't. In Rome, even the furniture is ironic. The cushion's wine, blood, mitre stain follows you out of the hall, not literally. That would be a miracle, and this century is already overstocked on those, but in your mind's eye, which is currently the most reliable eye you have. The rest of you is following a novice named Peter, a different Peter. There are 19 now. It's a pandemic down a corridor that's dark enough to make you reconsider the invention of electricity. He's carrying a candle that's more wax than wick, and it's dripping onto his sandal, where it's forming a tiny, molten puddle between his toes. He doesn't seem to notice. He's a monk. He's used to suffering in ways that are small, constant, and slightly ridiculous. He leaves you at a door that's less a door and more a suggestion of privacy. The room beyond is the size of a confession booth that's been trying to diet. There's a bed, which is a straw mattress wrapped in linen that has been patched so many times it's practically a quilt of its own history. The blankets are wool, scratchy wool, the kind of wool that makes you wonder if it still has the sheep attached and if the sheep is judging you. You lie down. The straw crunches like it's eating itself. The smell is a cocktail of hay, sweat, and the ghost of every previous guest who died here peacefully or otherwise. It's not the 4 seasons. It's the one season, and the season is Lent. You pull the blanket up. It's so abrasive you expect sparks. Somewhere in the next room, someone is snoring in Latin. Outside, a dog is barking at the moon, and the moon, being the moon, is ignoring him completely. You close your eyes. Sleep does not come. Instead, Forgery arrives, uninvited but oddly welcome. You've been holding that seal in your memory, that warm disk of beeswax with St. Peter fishing for souls or lunch. You remember its color. Not yellow, not brown, but something in between, the color of a gold coin that's been buried in a saint's grave for 3 centuries and dug up by a gravedigger with a guilty conscience. It's a color that says value, but also maybe don't ask where I came from. And you think, how would you fake that? The bees, for starters. The Lateran bees are a problem. They're not just bees, they're papal bees, which means they have diplomatic immunity and a pension plan. Their wax is different. The beekeeper monk said it was purified over 3 days, filtered through blessed linen, mixed with a secret Byzantine ingredient. But what if the secret ingredient is just another kind of wax? What if it's all a scam, a holy branding exercise, a way to make the Pope's candles burn brighter and his seals look shinier? You could probably replicate it. Probably. If you had the right bees, if you had the right blessing, if you had the right level of theological audacity. The matrix is another issue. The silver stamp with the crack through St. Peter's ear. You'd need a copy. You'd need a silversmith who could work from memory, or from a wax impression, or from a very detailed description whispered in a tavern at midnight. Silversmiths are expensive. Secrets are more expensive. A silversmith who can keep a secret while drinking mead is essentially a unicorn in a leather apron. You roll over. The straw pokes you in a new and exciting place. You imagine the forger, probably a cardinal's secretary with gambling debts, or a bishop who wants to transfer himself to a nicer diocese without bothering Gregory. Or maybe it's Henry, doing the most brazen thing imaginable, forging a papal decree that forgives him for everything, including the forgery. That's the kind of move that would impress the devil and get you a job in corporate law. But the color, the exact shade, you see it in your mind, glowing in torchlight, turning red in moonlight. Is it the myrrh? The beekeeper said they add myrrh to the ink, but what about the wax? You think about the gum arabic, the iron salts, the lapis that might be beetles. You think about how light hits a surface, how it refracts, how a seal that looks gold indoors might look green outdoors, like a chameleon of authority. To forge it perfectly, you'd need to see it in every light. You'd need to steal one, study it, maybe melt it down just to understand its composition. And then you'd have to explain why you have a puddle of papal beeswax in your room. The scratchy blanket is suddenly less scratchy. The straw is less pokey. You're deep in the fantasy now, the heist film of medieval politics. You'd need accomplices, a scribe with a steady hand, a beekeeper with loose morals, a raven that could be bribed to deliver the fake. You'd need access to the Lateran at night, which would mean befriending Peter the novice, the one with the candle wax between his toes, and convincing him that God wants you to see the archive after compline. You'd need a story, a cover, a reason to be near the seal. You'd need to learn Latin so well that even God wouldn't notice the difference. You'd need, in short, to become a better person than you are, because right now you can't even keep track of your own shoes. The mystery creeps in on little felt feet who has tried. Not the clumsy attempt, the obvious fake with the wrong color wax and the misspelled Latin. Who has come close? Who has studied the Lateran bees? Who has stood where you're standing, holding a real seal and thought, I could make this? The answer is probably no one. The answer is probably everyone. Power is a recipe, and recipes want to be copied. The secret ingredient is always the one you can't find at the market. You think about the ravens flying north. They carry the real seals, the real power. But what if one of them drops its message tube? What if a peasant finds it, sells it to a merchant, who sells it to a silversmith, who thinks I can do this? The chain of custody is only as strong as the bird's talons. The authority is only as secure as the wax. The snorer in the next room stops, coughs, starts again. The rhythm is different now, more syncopated, like he's dreaming of dancing. You wonder what a bishop dreams about. Probably not forgery, probably not bees. Probably about a throne that doesn't creak, a cushion that doesn't judge, a synod that ends before midnight. You dream about the seal. In your dream, it's still warm and it's multiplying. There are hundreds of them, all slightly different shades, all humming slightly different tunes, all asking to be believed. You wake up, not from sleep, because you haven't actually slept, but from the dream of thought. The blanket is still scratchy. The straw is still crunchy. The room still smells like history's laundry basket. But now you have a question that won't leave. What is the color of authority? Is it the pigment in the wax, or the belief that the wax is real? If you fake it perfectly and everyone believes it, is it still a fake? If Henry receives a forged papal release from his oaths, and he believes it, and his knights believe it, and they all go home and stop fighting, does it matter that the seal was pressed by a silversmith in a back alley, and not by Gregory's own hand? The answer probably is yes, and also no. And also, you should really try to sleep, because tomorrow there's a spy from Constantinople who wants to have dinner, and you're going to need all your wits to figure out if he's memorizing your facial expressions for his report. But the thought stays, the Lateran bees make a specific wax. The color is unique, but uniqueness can be copied. Uniqueness wants to be copied. And somewhere in a room like this one, someone is lying on scratchy wool, thinking the same thing, planning the perfect crime against heaven. The thought of the spy from Constantinople, with his memorized clauses and his ink-spilling laughter, becomes a dream that becomes a half-waking thought that becomes, somehow, alpine mud between your toes. You haven't left your room. The straw is still straw. The wool is still wool. The snoring neighbor has added a new verse to his NOCTUNAL Chinese letter. But your mind has decided to take a walk 3 years into the future, which is a very inconvenient time for a stroll because it's January, and the Alps are not known for their forgiving nature or their heated footpaths. You're standing in a mountain pass that looks like it was designed by a landscape architect who hated people. The sky is the color of a cold sword, which is to say it's gray and wants to hurt you. The wind is a choir of wolves who've taken up Gregorian chant and are really committed to the bit. And the mud. Oh, the mud. It isn't just mud. It's a slurry of melted snow, goat droppings, and the pulverized dreams of everyone who thought crossing the Alps in winter was a good idea. It's the consistency of a despair milkshake. Your feet are bare. This is unexpected. You are wearing shoes in your imagination, but the future has other plans. The mud is so cold it feels hot at first, a trick of nerve endings that are shutting down in protest. Then it just feels like needles, very cold needles, being jabbed into your feet by an angry tailor who works exclusively in ice. You take a step. The mud sucks at your heel with the determination of a toddler who doesn't want to be left at daycare. You pull free. The mud makes a sound like a wet kiss goodbye, which is more intimacy than you wanted from a mountain. The historical grounding is this: 3 years from now, in 1077, Henry Roman IV will walk through this exact pass. Not in a dream, not in a half-waking state, but for real, barefoot, in the dead of winter, as penance. He will stand outside the castle of Canossa for 3 days, waiting for Gregory to forgive him for calling the Pope a false monk, and generally being a very naughty emperor. It's one of the most famous episodes in medieval history, the mighty emperor humbled by snow, ice, and papal stubbornness. But right now, you're feeling it ahead of schedule, like a preview of someone else's mortification. It's the world's worst spoiler alert. The unusual detail is the sound. Not the wind, not the mud, but a kind of low humming that seems to come from the mountain itself. It's the sound of ice shifting deep in the rock, a geological murmur that says I was here before you and I'll be here after. It sounds like the mountain is clearing its throat before delivering a very long, very cold lecture on humility. You press your hand against the stone. It's slick with frost and something else, a kind of resin that seeps from the pine trees above. The resin is sticky and smells like church and sap and the memory of green things. Monks used to chew it to stay awake during prayers. It kept them alert and also glued their jaws shut, which was seen as a feature, not a bug. You take another step. The mud is getting deeper. It's now up to your ankles and you can feel individual pebbles in it, each one a tiny cold island in a sea of worse cold. One of them is shaped like a crown. You pick it up. It's just a rock, but it feels like a sign. You drop it. The mud swallows it without a sound. The mountain is hungry. The mystery is this: will it work? Will this walk, this penance, this frozen trudge through humiliation, actually achieve anything? Historians will argue about it for 1,000 years. Some will say Gregory won, that papal power reached its zenith when the emperor stood barefoot in the snow. Others will say Henry won, that he got his excommunication lifted and went right back to being emperor, his authority barely dented. The real mystery is whether either of them knew what they were doing, or if they were both just muddy men in a cold place, trying to remember whose idea this was in the first place. You look up. The pass is narrow, a throat of stone swallowing the sky. Snow begins to fall, not in gentle flakes but in clumps, like the clouds are tearing themselves apart in frustration. It lands on your shoulders, your hair, your bare arms. It melts instantly on your skin, because despite everything, you're still warm-blooded. But on the ground, it adds another layer to the mud, turning it into something more solid, more treacherous. You slip. You catch yourself on a pine branch. The bark is rough and smells like the resin, and you get a splinter the size of a small crusade. The wind howls a new verse, something about how you're not supposed to be here. This is future mud. This is penance that hasn't been earned yet. Henry is still in Germany, still laughing at his feasts, still tucking the Dictatus into his belt next to his dagger. He hasn't even thought about Canossa. But you're here, feeling it for him, a proxy of frostbite. It's like reading the last page of a book and then having to live it backwards. You take another step. The mud is nearly to your knees now, and it's not just cold, it's ancient. There are layers here. This mud has been mud for 1,000,000 years. It was mud when the Romans crossed these passes. It was mud when Hannibal took elephants through. It will be mud when the last emperor forgets why he was angry. You're just a moment in its long, wet life. It finds this funny. The pine trees around you are so tall they block out what little light remains. Their needles are weighted with snow, and every so often one gives up, dumping its load onto the path with a soft whump that sounds like a sigh. The forest is full of these sighs, a whole choir of trees expressing disappointment in your life choices. You keep walking because there's nothing else to do. The mud is a river flowing uphill and you're swimming in it. You wonder if Henry will feel this. Not the cold, that's a given, but the weight of it. The way each step is a question, am I doing this for God? For power? Because my advisors told me to. You wonder if he'll stop halfway up this pass, look back at the empire he's left behind, and think I could turn around. I could go home. I could pretend this never happened. But he won't, because the ravens have flown, because the seals have been pressed, because the mud has already been written into history and you can't unwrite mud. The snow is falling faster. The mud is freezing around your legs, turning into a kind of cold cement. You try to move and can't. You're stuck. This is how it ends, you think, encased in alpine slurry, a fossil of someone else's future penance. Tourists in 1,000 years will find your footprints and wonder why you were barefoot. A guide will tell them it was symbolic. It wasn't. It was just the way the dream went. Then the mud releases you. It lets go all at once, like it's bored now, like you're not the emperor it was waiting for. You stumble forward onto firmer ground, a patch of frozen grass that crunches like breaking glass. Your feet are numb, white, alien. They don't feel like yours anymore. They feel like history's feet. Henry's feet. You look back. The pass is empty. No emperor. No penance. Just the mud and the snow and the humming of the mountain. You felt the weight of a moment that hasn't happened yet, and now you're free to return to your straw mattress and your scratchy blanket and your snoring neighbor who is now snoring in what might be Greek. The future is a cold place, but you're not there yet. You're here in 1075, where the mud is still just mud, and the only thing you have to walk through is your own strange imagination. The mattress has forgiven you for leaving it, but the blanket holds a grudge. It scratches your chin as you sit up, a woolly reminder that you're still in 1075, where even the bedding has opinions. Your feet, which were so thoroughly frozen in the alpine mud of tomorrow, are now sweating inside leather shoes that are basically socks with trust issues. Rome's heat has returned with the petty vengeance of a Mediterranean summer that refuses to end, even in autumn. The city smells like it's fermenting. You need bread, not just because you're hungry, but because you need to do something normal, something that doesn't involve papal seals or bird-based diplomacy. You need to buy something with money that isn't a metaphysical claim to divine authority. So you head to the Forum, which is no longer the heart of an empire, but the spleen of a city, filtering, cleaning, producing things you'd rather not think about. The market is a tapestry of shouts. A fishmonger is calling his catch fresh from the Tiber, which is like advertising salad greens from a compost heap. A woman selling onions is demonstrating their freshness by biting into one like an apple, which is less a sales technique and more a cry for help. A man with a cart full of pottery is smashing a defective jug to prove how fragile the competition is, which seems counterproductive, but has drawn a crowd of people who just like watching things break. Rome loves a spectacle, even when it's just crockery. You find the bread stall. The baker is a short man with arms like hams and a face like a loaf that's risen too long. His name is Gaius, which is what you name your child when you want them to feel the weight of 2,000 years of bureaucracy. He's selling loaves that are brown, round, and could serve as cannonballs in a pinch. You point to one. He picks it up, bangs it on the table to dislodge the weevils, clonk, and hands it over. 3 denarii, he says, and a Hail Mary for the crust. You pay. The bread is warm, which is surprising. It's also older than you are, which is less surprising. You break off a piece. The crust is hard enough to write laws on. The inside is soft, chewy, and tastes like it was made by a miller who forgot to clean his grindstones. You chew. It's sustenance. It's also a metaphor for the church, hard shell, questionable interior, but it keeps you alive. The merchants are gathered around a central well, which is where the real business of the market happens. They're not selling anything right now. They're just talking, which in Rome is a competitive sport. The topic, inevitably, is the Pope. The Pope says he can move empires, says the fishmonger, wiping his hands on a cloth that was white during the reign of Charlemagne. He says he can move emperors. He says he can move the stones of the temple if he wants. The onion woman snorts. My mule can't be moved by Christ himself. I tried last Tuesday. I had a cart full of leeks. The mule sat down. I prayed. I pushed. I offered it a carrot blessed by the parish priest. The mule looked at me like I was a heretic. Finally, I gave up and went home. The leeks are still in the cart. The mule is still sitting there. It's been 4 days. The pottery smasher looks up. Is it the grey one with the ear that looks like a question mark? That's the one. He's a stubborn bastard. I tried to sell him a jug last week. He broke it with his hoof, on purpose. I saw the look in his eye. The unusual detail arrives with the cheese. A man walks past carrying a wheel of pecorino so large it has its own gravitational field. The cheese is covered in a rind that's been carved with the Pope's face, a sort of edible icon. Blessed by the Bishop of Ostia, the man says, not stopping. Cures indigestion and grants you plenary indulgence for half your purgatory time. Also goes well with figs. You watch the cheese go by, wondering if you're supposed to eat the blessing or just admire it. The market has no answers. The market barely has change for a solidus. The conversation returns to the mule. The fishmonger is speculating that the Pope could excommunicate the beast, which would at least mean it couldn't be buried in consecrated ground, which would save them all the trouble of digging a very large hole. The onion woman argues that excommunication only works on things with souls, and she's not convinced the mule qualifies. The pottery smasher points out that the mule has more personality than most bishops he's met, which seems like a solid argument for ensoulment. The mystery is small and brown and sitting in the shadow of the well. It's the mule. It has to be. You recognize the ear, bent, scarred, with a white patch that looks exactly like the map of Italia. The mule is chewing something slowly, with the bored dignity of a creature that has achieved enlightenment and found it wanting. Around its neck is a rope that's been tied to the well's handle. The rope is slack. The mule could walk away at any moment. It chooses not to. You move closer. The mule ignores you. It has a placard around its neck, written on a scrap of parchment in a hand that's trying very hard to be formal. This mule is under the protection of St. Ambrose. Do not move. Do not touch. Do not suggest it is stubborn, for it knows what it is and does not need your commentary. The pottery smasher sees you reading. That's new. Last week it just said beware. The week before it said caution, mule. The week before that, it had a drawing of a hand with a middle finger extended. We think the priests are having fun. The onion woman leans in. I think the mule writes them itself. I've seen it holding a quill in its teeth. Or maybe that was a dream. I've been inhaling a lot of onion fumes. The mule looks at you. Its eyes are the color of old Roman coins, greenish-brown and unreadable. There is, you swear, a glint of intelligence, or maybe just contempt. It's hard to tell with mules. They're the theologians of the animal kingdom, stubborn, unimpressed, and convinced they know more than you do. The fishmonger is still talking about the Pope, but his heart isn't in it. You can tell because he's using his hands less. Normally, when a Roman talks about power, his hands move like he's conducting an orchestra of chaos. Now they're still, because the mule has undercut the argument. If a mule can defy God, priest and pecorino bearing cheesemonger, what chance does the Pope have against an emperor who's also a man, and therefore probably less stubborn than this particular beast? You break off another piece of bread. It's stale. Of course it's stale. You chew. The market chews with you, on ideas, on rumors, on the gristle of the day. The sun moves overhead, a slow burn that makes everyone's shadow shorter and their temper shorter still. A child runs past, chasing a chicken that has escaped its pen and is now making a break for the Temple of Vesta, which seems symbolic but probably isn't. The mule shifts its weight. The rope twitches. The well handle creaks. For a moment you think it's going to stand, to move, to prove them all wrong, but it just settles again, more comfortable in its immovability. It has become a landmark. Tourists will come to see the stubborn mule of the Forum. Guides will point it out. On your left, the Temple of Saturn. On your right, a mule that has been sitting since the Ides of March. No, we don't know why. Yes, there's a gift shop. You walk away, bread in hand, the market's noise fading behind you. But the thought remains, power is a mule. You can claim it, you can tie it to a well, you can bless it with papal authority, but you can't make it move if it doesn't want to. Gregory can write all the clauses he wants. He can press them into golden wax, send them north on ravens, make bishops squirm on wooden thrones. But at the end of the day, there's a mule in the Forum that isn't impressed. And somewhere, probably in Germany, there's an emperor who feels the same way, though he'd never admit it. For now, though, you have bread. It's warm. It's terrible. It's real. You eat it as you walk, and you wonder if the people who will read about the Dectatus in 1,000 years will know that, while Gregory was rewriting the rules of heaven, a mule in Rome was refusing to move for leeks. Probably not. History forgets the mules. But the mules remember everything. The mattress has forgiven you for leaving it, but the blanket holds a grudge. It scratches your chin as you sit up, a woolly reminder that you're still in 1075, where even the bedding has opinions. Your feet, which were so thoroughly frozen in the alpine mud of tomorrow, are now sweating inside leather shoes that are basically socks with trust issues. Rome's heat has returned with the petty vengeance of a Mediterranean summer that refuses to end, even in autumn. The city smells like it's fermenting. You need bread, not just because you're hungry, but because you need to do something normal, something that doesn't involve papal seals or bird-based diplomacy. You need to buy something with money that isn't a metaphysical claim to divine authority. So you head to the Forum, which is no longer the heart of an empire but the spleen of a city, filtering, cleaning, producing things you'd rather not think about. The market is a tapestry of shouts. A fishmonger is calling his catch fresh from the Tiber, which is like advertising salad greens from a compost heap. A woman selling onions is demonstrating their freshness by biting into one like an apple, which is less a sales technique and more a cry for help. A man with a cart full of pottery is smashing a defective jug to prove how fragile the competition is, which seems counterproductive, but has drawn a crowd of people who just like watching things break. Rome loves a spectacle, even when it's just crockery. You find the bread stall. The baker is a short man with arms like hams and a face like a loaf that's risen too long. His name is Gaius, which is what you name your child when you want them to feel the weight of 2,000 years of bureaucracy. He's selling loaves that are brown round and could serve as cannonballs in a pinch. You point to one. He picks it up, bangs it on the table to dislodge the weevils, clonk, and hands it over. 3 denarii, he says, and a Hail Mary for the crust. You pay. The bread is warm, which is surprising. It's also older than you are, which is less surprising. You break off a piece. The crust is hard enough to write laws on. The inside is soft, chewy, and tastes like it was made by a miller who forgot to clean his grindstones. You chew. It's sustenance. It's also a metaphor for the church, hard shell, questionable interior, but it keeps you alive. The merchants are gathered around a central well, which is where the real business of the market happens. They're not selling anything right now. They're just talking, which in Rome is a competitive sport. The topic, inevitably, is the Pope. The Pope says he can move empires, says the fishmonger, wiping his hands on a cloth that was white during the reign of Charlemagne. He says he can move emperors. He says he can move the stones of the temple if he wants. The onion woman snorts. My mule can't be moved by Christ himself. I tried last Tuesday. I had a cart full of leeks. The mule sat down. I prayed. I pushed. I offered it a carrot blessed by the parish priest. The mule looked at me like I was a heretic. Finally, I gave up and went home. The leeks are still in the cart. The mule is still sitting there. It's been 4 days. The pottery smasher looks up. Is it the grey one, with the ear that looks like a question mark? That's the one. He's a stubborn bastard. I tried to sell him a jug last week. He broke it with his hoof, on purpose. I saw the look in his eye. The unusual detail arrives with the cheese. A man walks past carrying a wheel of pecorino so large it has its own gravitational field. The cheese is covered in a rind that's been carved with the Pope's face, a sort of edible icon. Blessed by the Bishop of Ostia, the man says, not stopping. Cures indigestion and grants you plenary indulgence for half your purgatory time. Also goes well with figs. You watch the cheese go by, wondering if you're supposed to eat the blessing or just admire it. The market has no answers. The market barely has change for a solidus. The conversation returns to the mule. The fishmonger is speculating that the Pope could excommunicate the beast, which would at least mean it couldn't be buried in consecrated ground, which would save them all the trouble of digging a very large hole. The onion woman argues that excommunication only works on things with souls, and she's not convinced the mule qualifies. The pottery smasher points out that the mule has more personality than most bishops he's met, which seems like a solid argument for ensoulment. The mystery is small and brown and sitting in the shadow of the well. It's the mule. It has to be. You recognize the ear, bent, scarred, with a white patch that looks exactly like the map of Italia. The mule is chewing something slowly, with the bored dignity of a creature that has achieved enlightenment and found it wanting. Around its neck is a rope that's been tied to the well's handle. The rope is slack. The mule could walk away at any moment. It chooses not to. You move closer. The mule ignores you. It has a placard around its neck, written on a scrap of parchment in a hand that's trying very hard to be formal. This mule is under the protection of St. Ambrose. Do not move. Do not touch. Do not suggest it is stubborn, for it knows what it is and does not need your commentary. The pottery smasher sees you reading. That's new. Last week it just said beware. The week before it said caution, mule. The week before that it had a drawing of a hand with a middle finger extended. We think the priests are having fun. The onion woman leans in. I think the mule writes them itself. I've seen it holding a quill in its teeth. Or maybe that was a dream. I've been inhaling a lot of onion fumes. The mule looks at you. Its eyes are the color of old Roman coins, greenish-brown and unreadable. There is, you swear, a glint of intelligence, or maybe just contempt. It's hard to tell with mules. They're the theologians of the animal kingdom, stubborn, unimpressed, and convinced they know more than you do. The fishmonger is still talking about the Pope, but his heart isn't in it. You can tell because he's using his hands less. Normally, when a Roman talks about power, his hands move like he's conducting an orchestra of chaos. Now they're still, because the mule has undercut the argument. If a mule can defy God, priest, and pecorino bearing cheesemonger, what chance does the Pope have against an emperor who's also a man, and therefore probably less stubborn than this particular beast? You break off another piece of bread. It's stale. Of course it's stale. You chew. The market chews with you, on ideas, on rumors, on the gristle of the day. The sun moves overhead, a slow burn that makes everyone's shadow shorter and their temper shorter still. A child runs past, chasing a chicken that has escaped its pen and is now making a break for the Temple of Vesta, which seems symbolic but probably isn't. The mule shifts its weight. The rope twitches. The well handle creaks. For a moment you think it's going to stand to move to prove them all wrong, but it just settles again, more comfortable in its immovability. It has become a landmark. Tourists will come to see the stubborn mule of the Forum. Guides will point it out. On your left, the Temple of Saturn. On your right, a mule that has been sitting since the Ides of March. No, we don't know why. Yes, there's a gift shop. You walk away, bread in hand, the market's noise fading behind you. But the thought remains, power is a mule. You can claim it, you can tie it to a well, you can bless it with papal authority, but you can't make it move if it doesn't want to. Gregory can write all the clauses he wants. He can press them into golden wax, send them north on ravens, make bishops squirm on wooden thrones. But at the end of the day, there's a mule in the Forum that isn't impressed. And somewhere, probably in Germany, there's an emperor who feels the same way, though he'd never admit it. For now, though, you have bread. It's warm. It's terrible. It's real. You eat it as you walk, and you wonder if the people who will read about the Dectatus in 1,000 years will know that, while Gregory was rewriting the rules of heaven, a mule in Rome was refusing to move for leeks. Probably not. History forgets the mules, but the mules remember everything. The bread sits in your hand like a theological problem, hard on the outside, questionable on the inside, and somehow essential to the whole operation. You're back in the Lateran Palace, though you're not sure how you got here. The doors seem to open for you now, a combination of familiarity and the fact that you smell like market, onions, fish, and the stubbornness of mules. The guards let you pass. You're part of the furniture. Not the good furniture, but the kind that's useful enough not to throw out. You find yourself in an archive room that you've never seen before, which is saying something because you've been wandering these halls like a ghost with a bad sense of direction. This room is smaller, tighter, more secretive. It's where they keep the old stuff. Not the display copies, not the ones that get shown to bishops who need to be impressed, but the working drafts, the waste parchment, the documents that have been used as coasters for wine cups during particularly boring synods. The smell is incredible: old leather, older dust, and a faint whiff of despair that's become so concentrated it's practically a liturgical incense of its own. You're holding a copy of the Dictatus. Not the Dictatus. There's only one of those, and it's probably under Gregory's pillow, which you imagine is stuffed with excommunications and dreams of imperial groveling. No, this is a copy. A draft. A working document that has been copied and recopied until the ink is tired. The parchment is thin enough to see your fingers through, which is convenient because you need both hands to hold the bread and the document, and you're using your knees as a desk. That's when you see it. Between Clause 19, the one about the Pope being judged by no one, and Clause 21, the one about the Pope's decisions being unchangeable, there is a gap. Not a big gap, a sliver, a breath. A place where the parchment is just a little too clean, where the surface is just a little too smooth. It's been scraped. Scraping is the medieval version of the delete key, except it's permanent and smells like frustration. You take a candle from the wall. There's always a candle. This is Rome. Candles are like Wi-Fi, and hold it close. The light catches the surface at an angle, and yes, there it is, the ghost of letters. Clause 20, or what used to be Clause 20. Someone has taken a pumice stone and rubbed it out so thoroughly that only the faintest indentation remains, like the memory of a scar. You lean in. Your nose is almost touching the parchment. The smell is intense, old skin, because vellum is skin, old prayers, because ink is faith, and something metallic, like a coin that's been held in a sweaty palm during a very tense negotiation. You can almost make out the shape of the words, quad, something, quad salus. No, that's not it. Quad non. Maybe, what non? What was so non that it had to be removed? The unusual detail is the candle soot. Not the soot on the candle, the soot in the gap. Whoever erased Clause 20 did it by candlelight, and in the process they left behind a smudge of carbon, a fingerprint of flame. The soot is softer than the surrounding parchment, like a bruise. If you blow on it gently, it shifts, just a little, like the ghost of the clause is trying to reassemble itself in the air. You don't blow, you don't want to erase the erasure. You want to know what it was. Was it doubt? A moment when Gregory, pacing in his drafty room, listening to the ravens fly north, wondered if he'd gone too far. Did he write, quad non sit nesses? That it is not necessary to depose the emperor, not necessary to claim all this power. And then did he look at the words and think, no, I cannot show weakness. The parchment cannot show doubt. God does not doubt, and I am his vicar. And so he scraped it away, pumice in hand, the sound of it a small, dry scream in the midnight scriptorium. Or was it something stranger? A clause so radical that even Gregory's closest cardinals blanched. Quad papa passit rider in synodo, that the Pope may laugh in synod. A declaration that solemnity was optional, that power could be wielded with a smile, that the whole thing was, perhaps, a bit ridiculous. And when he wrote it, did Brother Ambrose, fat, mead-loving Ambrose, look up from his cup and say, Your Holiness, you can't put that in. The Germans will think you're joking. The Byzantines will think you're mad. The Normans will think it's a challenge and invade something. And Gregory, in a rare moment of practicality, scraped it out. Or, and this is the thought that keeps you awake, the mystery that will never be solved, was it never there at all? Was Clause 20 a blank space from the beginning, a deliberate lacuna, a hole in the argument that makes the whole thing stronger. Because if you can't find the missing piece, you can't attack it. You can't argue with what isn't there. It's the theological equivalent of a magician's sleight of hand. Look at all these claims I am making. Don't look at the one I'm not. You run your finger over the gap. The scraped parchment is smoother than the rest, as if it's been petted by centuries of curious hands. How many people have noticed? How many scribes have copied this copy and thought, something's missing? Did Quintillus know? Did Microscopus, with his horsehair quill, copy the gap faithfully, preserving the absence? Did Hildebert, squirming on his throne, read clause 19 and then clause 21 and feel the disorienting leap, like stepping from a stair that isn't there? The candle gutters. The flame is eating itself, which is what candles do when they're left alone too long. It's a metaphor, but you're too tired to chase it. You blow it out. The smoke rises, a grey thread that smells like prayers that have been cancelled. In the dark, the gap is just a gap. You can't see it, but you know it's there. It's the hole in the center of power, the moment of doubt that Gregory couldn't afford to keep, the question that had no answer. You fold the parchment, carefully, along the creases that have been creased 1,000 times, and put it back on the shelf. The shelf is full of other papal documents, all of them pretending to be complete. Liber Pontificalis, Decretum Gratiani, a letter from Pope Leo Roman III to Charlemagne that still smells like the horse it rode in on. They all have their own gaps, their own erased clauses, their own midnight doubts. Gregory's is just the newest. You leave the archive. The door closes behind you with a click that sounds like a secret locking itself away. In the hallway, a raven. Yes, another one. The Lateran has an infestation of symbolic birds, watches you from a windowsill. It has something in its beak. A piece of wax, maybe. A fragment of clause 20 carried off to some nest where it will be remembered by chicks who don't know what it means. You walk back to your room. The bread is still in your hand, now cold. You eat it. It tastes like the gap. It tastes like what isn't there. And you realize that the most powerful part of the Dictatus might not be the 27 clauses that survived. It might be the one that didn't. The one that Gregory erased. The one that left a space for everyone else to fill with their own fears, their own hopes, their own stubborn, mule-like refusal to move. Tomorrow you'll tell someone, maybe Quintillus, maybe a raven, you'll whisper, there's a hole in the document. And they'll look at you and say, of course there is. There's always a hole. That's where God fits. The gap in the parchment follows you to dinner, which is not a metaphor but a literal crumb of vellum that has stuck to your sleeve and is now floating in your wine. The wine is sour, because this is Rome and good wine is either saved for the Pope or shipped to the Normans as a peace offering. You fish the crumb out with your finger. It dissolves instantly, leaving behind a smudge of ink that tastes like iron and secrets. You drink anyway. At this point, what's a little more mystery in your bloodstream? The dinner is in a guest house attached to the monastery of San Lorenzo. The table is long, scarred, and sticky with generations of spilled blessings. The benches are designed by the same sadist who made Hildebert's throne, but at least here you're allowed to squirm without making ecclesiastical history. The air smells of roasted fennel, old fish sauce, garum, the ancient Roman condiment that smells like a fisherman's armpit but tastes like heaven. And the particular funk of men who've been traveling for weeks without bothering to judge themselves. Across from you sits the spy. You don't know he's a spy at first. He introduces himself as Basil, which is the Byzantine equivalent of naming your kid John and hoping he blends in. He's dressed like a merchant, which means his tunic is slightly too clean and his fingers are slightly too ink-stained for someone who claims to sell silk. He eats olives one at a time, carefully, as if each pit might contain a coded message. Maybe they do. Maybe the olives are the code. You've been in the 11th century too long. Everything looks like a conspiracy now. He's been in Rome for 3 weeks, memorizing. That's what he tells you once the wine has loosened his tongue and the fennel has made everyone's breath equally suspect. 27 clauses, he says, his Greek accent turning the Latin into a song that's half liturgy, half sea shanty. I have them all up here. He taps his temple. His temple makes a hollow sound, which is either a sign of deep wisdom or just a very thick skull. The unusual detail arrives with the translation. Basil didn't just memorize them in Latin. He translated them in his head into Greek because his superiors in Constantinople refused to read Latin on principle. They see it as a barbaric language spoken by people who think togas are still fashionable. I wrote them down, he says, pulling a scrap of parchment from his satchel. It's so thin you can see his knee through it. For the patriarch, and for the emperor, and for my own sanity, because 27 clauses is too many to keep in your head when you're trying to remember which Roman inns have bedbugs. He slides the parchment across the table. You read it. The Greek is impeccable, too impeccable. It has the polish of a man who's translated not just words, but intent. And the intent in Greek sounds insane. Omicron tau iota, mu omicron nu omicron sigma, omicron rho omega mu alpha iota, omicron sigma pi alpha sigma. That the Roman pontiff alone. The words are there, but the flavor is different. In Latin, salus sounds solemn, like a bell tolling. In Greek, monos sounds lonely, like a man shouting in an empty room. The whole document reads like a desperate plea from someone who's been locked in the Lateran with too much incense and not enough friends. Basil watches your face. You see it, yes. It sounds. He searches for a word that won't get him stabbed. Ambitious. Ambitious is one word for it, you say. He leans in. The fennel steam rises between you, making his face waver like a mirage. In our scriptorium, when I read the translation aloud, the scribes laughed, not politely. They laughed so hard one of them fell off his stool. He spilled ink on the copy. It looked like a bloodstain on the word depona. We kept it. The patriarch thought it was a commentary. The image is perfect. A scriptorium in Constantinople, all gold mosaics and smug superiority, suddenly confronted with a document that claims one man in Rome can move heaven, earth, and the emperor's left eyebrow. The scribes, trained in centuries of Byzantine bureaucracy where power is diffuse and everyone has to sign everything in triplicate, can't process the simplicity of it. One man, all the power, no appeals process. It's so absurd it's funny. It's so funny it's terrifying. Basil takes back the parchment. The patriarch says Gregory has confused himself with God. He says the Pope is like a man who's been given the keys to the imperial palace and has decided the palace is now a manger and he is the ox. Or something. My Greek is better than my metaphors. He pours more wine. The wine jug is ceramic, shaped like a duck. The wine comes out of the duck's beak, which is the most cheerful thing you've seen all week. You both watch the duck vomit sour grapes into your cups. It's a moment of shared absurdity. The thing is, Basil says, quieter now, because there are other diners. Pilgrims, monks, a man who might be a priest or might just like the food. The patriarch isn't angry. He's amused. He thinks Gregory is playing a game, and the game is called how far can one man's ego stretch before it snaps back and hits him in the face. He's taking bets. The emperor has wagered a solidus on by next Easter. I've got my money on never, because the man is made of sinew and stubbornness. He drinks. You drink. The fennel is finished. The fish sauce has been passed around so many times that it's now a communal offering to the god of acquired tastes. A monk at the end of the table is telling a story about a donkey that recited the Nicene Creed, but he keeps getting interrupted by hiccups that sound suspiciously like Latin declensions. The mystery isn't in what Basil has memorized. It's in what he's forgotten, or what he's choosing not to say. Because while he's laughing at the translation, while he's critiquing the grammar and the hubris, his eyes keep flicking to the door. He's waiting for someone, or he's waiting to leave. Or he's waiting for the duck-shaped jug to refill itself, which is as likely as the Pope admitting he might be wrong. You ask him, will your emperor care? When you bring this back, when the patriarch laughs, when the scribes spill their ink, will Alexios do anything? Basil's face goes still. He's not Basil anymore. He's a functionary of an empire that has survived 1,000 years by never overreacting to anything, including barbarian invasions, plagues, and now, a very pushy pope. He'll read it, he says. He'll sigh. He'll write a letter. The letter will be so beautifully worded that people will frame it. It will mention theology, tradition, and the importance of unity. It will not mention Gregory by name. It will not need to. The silence will be the response. He stands. He's finished his olives. He's finished his mission. The difference between us, he says, is that you think words are power. We know that power is power. Words are just the noise it makes while walking. He leaves. He doesn't pay. Spies never do. You're left with the duck of infinite wine, the crumb of dissolved parchment, and the faint smell of fennel that has soaked into your clothes. In your hand is a drop of ink from Basil's satchel. He spilled some when he reached for a final olive. It's on your thumb, a tiny black dot. You could smudge it. You could keep it. You could press it into wax and make your own clause, quod hoc omni sit absurdum, that all of this is absurd. Instead, you wipe it on the table. It leaves a mark. The table has seen worse. The table is 1,000 years old. It has scars from barbarians, from popes, from spies who laughed too hard at their own translations. One more ink stain won't matter. But the thought remains. Somewhere in Constantinople, a scribe is mopping up spilled ink, and the ink is forming a shape. A crown. A mule. A question mark. The scribe won't notice. He'll just clean it up. But the shape will be there, under the rag, under the stone, under the whole Byzantine certainty that power is power and words are noise. And in Rome, in the Lateran, Gregory is pacing, and the ravens are flying, and the gap in the parchment is waiting for someone to fill it with something other than silence. The corridor is dark except for a single torch that's given up on producing actual light, and is now just smoking sullenly, like a chimney with a philosophy degree. You're following a sound, a whisper that moves like someone who's lost their map of the palace. The voice belongs to a deacon named Lucas, who has a face like a worried ferret and the posture of a man who's been carrying secrets so long they've given him curvature of the spine. He's telling you about the vote, not the official version, where all the cardinals gathered in solemn deliberation and unanimously affirmed the Pope's right to boss around the universe. No, this is the other version, the one whispered in the kitchens, the one that smells of night wine and confessions that weren't quite complete. It was Brother Cardinal's night, Lucas says, which sounds like a fraternity event, but is actually just what they call it when the College of Cardinals meets, and no one else is invited. They were in the consistory chamber, the one with the ceiling that leaks holiness and the carpet that's been worn thin by pacing. 23 cardinals, all in red, which is a color that looks good on no one after midnight. The consistory chamber is at the end of the corridor, behind a door that's been closed since the vote. Lucas pushes it open. It groans like a martyr who's tired of being asked for miracles. Inside, the air is thick with the ghosts of arguments. The room is round, which is supposed to encourage equality, but mostly makes everyone dizzy. The walls are lined with niches, each one holding a red hat on a stand, like a museum of decapitated authority. In the center is a table made from a single slab of porphyry, which is the purple stone that emperors used to be carved from, which means the table is literally more regal than everyone in the room combined. "The candles were low," Lucas whispers. "They always are. Saves money. Also, it's harder to see who's sleeping." He points to a chair. It's high-backed, upholstered in velvet that's been worn to a shine by cardinal elbows. That's where he was, Cardinal Benedict, or maybe it was Theodwyn. No, Theodwyn was by the window. It might have been Peter, one of the Peters. There are 8. The mystery is already taking shape. No one can agree on who it was. The memory is a cloud of red fabric and old man smell. But the story remains, polished by retelling until it shines like a reliquary. Lucas continues. They'd been at it for hours. Clause 17 or 18. The one about the Pope being able to transfer bishops. The one that makes every cardinal nervous because they all have dioceses they like, and no one wants to wake up in Ancira. The arguments were circular. Cardinal Odo kept saying Placid, said, "It pleases," but in never finishing the thought. Cardinal Hugo was snoring, not subtly. He sounded like a pig being slowly deflated. Cardinal Gregory, no, not the Gregory, the other one, the one from Pavia, was drawing little castles in the margin of his carpi. The unusual detail arrives with the incense. The thurible, a silver ball on chains that looks like a weapon from a very litigious crusade, was being swung by a deacon who was either deeply devout or trying to stay awake. The smoke was thick, myrrh and frankincense, and something else, something herbal that Lucas claims was added by mistake. Brother Ambrose brought it up from the garden, said it was for courage, smelled like a dead cat soaked in vinegar, but it worked. Everyone was very alert, except for the one who wasn't. He points to the chair again. Cardinal, let's call him Peter for simplicity, had been having trouble sleeping. The ravens, you see, they nest outside his window. He complained about them. Said they sounded like whispering penitents, so he'd been taking a tisane. Monkshard and valerian. Tastes like feet, knocks you out like a hammer. The mystery deepens. Was it the tea? Was it the incense? Or was it something else? A saintly visitation, a demonic prank, a medical condition that will be diagnosed in 800 years as sleep apnea with theological implications. So they're voting, Lucas says, going around the table. Each cardinal says placid or non-placid. It's not a democracy, it's a performance of unanimity. When it's Peter's turn, he's asleep, eyes closed, breathing deep, hands folded over his belly like he's praying to digestion. The deacon recording the votes nudges him. No response. Cardinal Odo kicks his chair. Nothing. Lucas pauses for dramatic effect. He's a deacon, but he should be a playwright. And then, just as the Pope is about to move on, Peter says it. Clear as a bell, placid, his eyes are still closed. His head is tilted back. He's snoring while saying it. It comes out as a kind of humming affirmative. Acid. Like a dying cow that approves of the pasture. The image is perfect. A cardinal, red hat askew, mouth open, voting in his sleep. The historical grounding is that the vote was recorded as unanimous. It had to be. Gregory needed every voice, but the unofficial record, the one kept in kitchen gossip and deacon whispers, has an asterisk, placid, sleeping. Everyone looked at everyone else. The Pope looked at Peter. Peter looked at the inside of his eyelids. No one knew what to do. You can't ask a man to revote when he's technically already voted. You can't wake him up and say, "Excuse me, Eminence, but did you mean that?" Because what if he said no? What if his waking mind disagreed with his sleeping conscience? What if his dreams were more holy than his reason? The room is cold now. The torch has gone out completely, and Lucas is lit only by moonlight through a narrow window. He looks like a ghost telling ghost stories. So they kept it. The notary wrote it down, placid, no asterisk, no footnote, just approval. Peter slept through the rest of the meeting. When it ended, the other cardinals carried him out. 8 of them. It took 8. Not because he was heavy, but because no one wanted to be the one who dropped a sleeping cardinal. Imagine the sin. The mystery is which red hat, hanging on its niche, belongs to the man who voted in his dreams. Lucas doesn't know. He points to one. It's got a stain on the brim, a dark patch that could be wine, could be wax, could be the sweat of a man wrestling with angels in his sleep. They say he doesn't remember. They say he woke up in his chambers, fully dressed, with the decree on his chest like a cat that brought him a dead mouse. He read it. He sighed. He said, well, I must have meant it, and that was that. You look at the hat. It's just a hat, but it's also a vote. It's also a question that has no answer. Do we mean what we say when we're not there to hear ourselves say it? Is a sleepwalking cardinal more honest than a waking one? Does God speak through dreams, or just through the Valerian tea? Lucas leads you out. The door closes. The consistory chamber goes back to being a round room full of red hats and quiet doubts. In the corridor, the torch has relit itself. Someone has been by with a fresh one. It burns bright and certain, which is more than you can say for most of the voting population. The thing is, Lucas says, Peter, or Benedict, or Theodwyn, or whoever is still a cardinal. He still votes. And every time he votes now, everyone watches him. Is he awake? Is he asleep? Does it matter? He voted for the dictatus. He voted for the Pope's power. Maybe his sleeping mind knew something his waking mind didn't, or maybe he just had really good dreams. He leaves you at your door. Your room smells like the scratchy blanket and the alpine mud you're still not sure you actually walked through. You lie down. You think about the cardinal, somewhere in the city, sleeping in his red robes, dreaming of clauses. Does he fly with the ravens in his dreams? Does he sit on a wooden throne and squirm? Does he vote over and over a chorus of placid that echoes through the canyons of his subconscious? You'll never know. No one will. The official record is clean. The unofficial record is a whisper. The truth is asleep in a room with monctured tea on the nightstand and a red hat on a hook, dreaming of popes and power and the sound of his own voice saying yes to something he doesn't quite understand. In the morning, the ravens will fly again. The Pope will pace. The scribes will tremble. And somewhere, a cardinal will wake up and read the day's decisions, wondering which ones he made and which ones were made for him by the part of himself that stays awake when the rest of the world sleeps. The crumb of erased clause 20 is still stuck to your sleeve when you push open the door to the Papal Archive, which is less a grand library and more a stone lung that breathes dust instead of air. The room is vast, vertical, a tower of pigeonholes and pigeon problems. There are actual pigeons, too, 3 of them, perched on a beam near the ceiling, looking down at the accumulation of human folly with the serene indifference of creatures that have learned to read and found it wanting. The smell is what hits you first, a dry, warm smell like old bread left in a tomb. It's parchment, thousands of skins stretched and scraped and written on, and left to molt into history. It's also mouse droppings, because for every monk copying a document, there's a mouse planning to eat it. The mice here are theological experts. They can tell the difference between a papal bull and a grocery list by taste alone. They prefer the bulls. More fiber. The archive is kept by a nun named Sister Gertrude, which is what you name a woman when you want her to be good at hitting things with rulers. She doesn't hit you. She just looks at you over the rim of a candle that's burned so low it's more puddle than flame. Her eyes say you're not supposed to be here, but you're here, so be quick about it. She's organizing scrolls by size, which is like organizing a zoo by volume. The logic is there, but it's not going to help anyone find the elephants. You're here because you have a question that won't leave. What happens to the gaps? If Clause 20 was scraped away, if entire documents can be erased, what else has been lost? Not just removed, not just hidden, gone. You want to see the shelf where the failures lie. Gertrude points with a bony finger to a corner. It's darker there, because the candles are rationed, and this corner has been deemed unworthy of illumination. You make your way past stacks of papal letters that have been tied with ribbons that used to be red, but have faded to the color of dried blood. Past bulls whose seals have cracked and fallen off, leaving behind circles of wax that look like tiny, abandoned amphitheaters. Past a row of codices that have been gnawed by something larger than a mouse, possibly a former cardinal who got locked in overnight and had to eat his way out. The unusual detail is the pigeon. One of them has fluttered down and is now pecking at a scroll that's been left on a low shelf. It's not eating it. It's reading it, head cocked, eye beady with comprehension. The scroll is a copy of the Dictatus, one of Microscopus's miniature versions, small enough to fit in a message tube but apparently also perfect for pigeon review. The bird pecks at Clause 12. Depona. It pecks again. Then it looks at you and coos, a sound that is either agreement or a request for a cracker. You don't have a cracker, you have existential dread. You offer some. The pigeon is not impressed. The mystery is in the dust. It's not uniform. Some shelves have a fine, even layer, like snow on a field. Others have drifts, piles, dunes. These are the shelves where things have been moved recently, or where things have been left to die. You find a scroll that's so dusty you can write your name in the coating just by looking at it too hard. You pick it up. It's heavy. Not with importance, but with neglect. It's a letter from Pope John Roman XI to the King of France. John Roman XI was the one who was basically run by his mother, Marozia, who was the power behind the papal throne and also behind several actual thrones, and who allegedly once threw a pope out a window. The letter is about the proper use of the pallium. It's boring. It's so boring that the dust on it has fallen asleep. You put it back. The dust resettles, grateful. Gertrude shuffles past, carrying a stack of documents tied with a rope that's fraying. She drops one. It's a papal indulgence, pre-signed, fill in the blank. You could write your own name and get out of purgatory for 40 days. You consider it. You don't have a pen. You also don't have 40 days of sin that need remitting, though the pigeon might disagree. The archive is a geography of forgetting. The top shelves, near the windows where the rain gets in, hold the water-damaged documents. The words have bled into each other, creating a kind of accidental poetry. Depona has merged with Donaire. Deposing has become donating. The Pope can give away the empire to anyone with a signed receipt. The bottom shelves, near the floor where the Tiber sometimes visits, hold the flood survivors. They smell like river. They smell like defeat. You find a niche where the Raven's message tubes are stored. They're empty now, the tiny bone cylinders lined up like soldiers who have been discharged. One of them still has a fragment of parchment stuck to the inside. You pry it out with a fingernail. It's a piece of Clause 12, just the word Salus. Alone. The letters are microscopic, perfect, the work of Microscopus and his horsehair quill. You hold it up to the light. The word is alone. Appropriately. The pigeon coos again. It's followed you. It's now pecking at a scroll that's been tied with a ribbon made of human hair. You don't want to know. You move deeper into the dark corner, the place Gertrude indicated. Here, the pigeonholes are empty. Not just empty, clean. No dust. No droppings. No scraps of forgotten power. It's a stretch of wall that has been scrubbed. The historical grounding is this: sometimes documents disappear on purpose. Sometimes a pope changes his mind. Sometimes a clause is so dangerous that even its absence is dangerous, so you scrub the shelf where it sat, you scrape the gap, you send the pigeons away with empty tubes. You pretend the thing never existed, but the pigeons remember. The one following you has something in its beak, not wax, not parchment, a seed. A small, dry seed from the Lateran's garden, from Gregory's secret courage herb, from the plant that grows next to rosemary for remembrance. The pigeon drops it at your feet. It rolls into a crack in the stone floor and disappears. You look at the bird. It looks at you. You both know the secret. Archives are not for keeping things. They're for deciding what to lose. The pigeons are the real librarians. They carry words away. They drop them where they please. They eat the ones that taste like hubris. They plant the ones that might grow into something else. You leave the archive. Gertrude nods, barely. The door closes. The pigeon stays behind, pecking at the empty pigeonholes, looking for the thing that was never there. Outside, the Tiber is flowing. The ravens are sleeping. The bees are making wax that will seal documents that will be stored in rooms that will be cleaned by nuns who know that some gaps are bigger than others. The seed is gone. But somewhere, in a crack in the floor, in a corner of the Lateran that no one cleans, something might be growing. A new clause, a new question, a new kind of power that isn't written down at all. The garden is a secret the way a whisper in a library is a secret, technically true, but everyone knows it's there. They're just too polite to listen. You find it by following the smell of rosemary, which is the plant kingdom's version of a history book, sharp, memorable, and prone to making you sneeze if you inhale too deeply. The rosemary leads you up a staircase that isn't on any map, through a door that's been painted to look like a wall, and out onto a terrace that has no business being this peaceful, while the rest of Rome is busy arguing about who gets to be God's favorite. It's small, the garden. A rectangle of dirt that's been coaxed into fertility by monks who treat compost like a sacrament. There are raised beds made from old roof tiles, each one a mosaic of cracked terracotta that looks like it was salvaged from the ruins of a lesser empire. The plants are arranged by height, which makes the garden look like a choir, tall ones in back, short ones in front, all singing silently to the sun. The rosemary is everywhere. It's the base line, the foundation, the thing you remember when everything else has faded. Gregory planted it, they say, on his first day as Pope, which was also the day he decided to remember everything that had ever gone wrong in the Church, so he could fix it with absolute papal authority, and possibly better record-keeping. The rosemary has grown wild. It's become a hedge, a maze, a fortress. You could hide a small schism in there and no one would notice until it flowered. But the rosemary is not the secret. The secret is in the corner, in a pot that's been placed on a pedestal like a reliquary. The pot is unglazed clay, simple, humble, the kind of thing you'd expect to see holding a dead plant in a monastery cell. The plant inside it is not dead. It is, in fact, aggressively alive. It's a herb you don't recognize, with leaves that are purple on one side and silver on the other, as if it can't decide whether to be royalty or moonlight. It smells like pepper and pine and something else, something that makes the back of your throat tingle like you've just swallowed a tiny argument. This is the courage herb. It has no Latin name that anyone will write down, because naming it would make it ordinary, and this plant is many things, but ordinary is not one of them. The monks call it herba audacia. The beekeeper monk calls it that purple thing that makes the Pope talk louder. Gregory calls it nothing at all. He just visits it before every confrontation. The historical grounding is this: Gregory Roman 7 was not a brave man by nature. He was a bureaucrat, a legalist, a man who preferred parchment to people and ink to blood. But to issue the Dectatus, to claim power over emperors and kings, to rewrite the rules of the universe in 27 clauses, he needed courage. Not the courage of soldiers, the heart, loud kind. The cold, quiet courage of a man who knows he's about to be hated and does it anyway. So he grew this herb. Or someone grew it for him. Or it grew itself, because Rome is like that. Things appear when you need them, especially if you're Pope. The unusual detail is the watering can. It's a small bronze thing, green with age, shaped like a fish with a gaping mouth. The fish is a Christian symbol, yes, but this particular fish has a smirk. You pick it up. It's heavy. It's filled not with water but with wine, cheap, sour wine that's been mixed with rainwater and a drop of holy oil. The courage herb drinks wine. The rosemary gets plain water. The hierarchy of the garden is clear. Remembrance is a duty, but courage is a sacrament. Gregory appears. You don't hear him come in, which is impressive because his shoes are still red and still cracked and still loud on stone. But the garden is a place where sound behaves differently. It's absorbed by the rosemary, filtered through the leaves, turned into the buzzing of bees. He nods at you. He's not surprised you're here. The garden has a way of collecting people who have questions they can't ask out loud. He walks to the purple herb. He doesn't kneel. Popes don't kneel for plants. But he does bend slightly, which is the papal equivalent of supplication. He plucks a leaf. The plant shivers. The leaf is small, oval, perfect. He rolls it between his thumb and forefinger, a gesture so familiar it must be ritual. The smell intensifies. Pepper and pine and something like thunder. He puts it in his mouth and chews. His face doesn't change, but his eyes do. They get brighter, sharper, more certain. It's like watching a man remember that he's right, even when he's not. Rosemary is for memory, he says, his voice quiet. You plant it so you don't forget what you came here to do, but courage, you don't plant that. You borrow it. You take a leaf before you speak to a king, before you write a clause, before you change the world, and then you give it back, minus a little. Courage is like a loan from God. The interest is paid in sleepless nights. He plucks another leaf and holds it out to you. You take it. It's warm from his fingers. You put it in your mouth. The taste is immediate, fire and frost, a contradiction that somehow resolves into clarity. You feel it in your chest, a spreading warmth that says, say something bold. You don't. You're not the Pope. You're just a person with a leaf in your mouth and a question in your throat. Does it work, or does he just think it works? The mystery is this, the herb's origin. Gregory says it came from a hermit on Mount Athos, who sent it in a clay pot with a note that read, "For when you need to speak truth to power, even when the power is you." But the beekeeper monk says it came from the Lateran's own garden, a volunteer that sprouted in the compost heap, a weed that refused to be weeded. Sister Gertrude says it came from the East, from a woman who traded it for a papal blessing on her goats. The goats, she claims, never lost a fight again. The goats also started a monastery, but that's probably apocryphal. You chew. The taste fades, but the feeling remains. It's like swallowing certainty. It's also, you realize, a little like the courage it takes to believe in something ridiculous, like a mule that won't move, or a seal that hums, or a clause that's been scraped away but still leaves a scar. Gregory plucks a sprig of rosemary. He holds it to his nose, breathes in. I remember every pope who failed, he says. They're all here, in the needles. Benedict Roman IX sold the papacy. John Roman XII, murdered, debauched, died in bed with someone else's wife. They're the compost, I'm the flower. That's what courage is, growing out of failure and pretending you don't smell like it. He walks out. The garden is yours now, alone with the bees and the rosemary and the purple herb that drinks wine and grants courage on loan. You touch its leaves. They're soft, surprisingly so. They feel like the opposite of parchment. Living, flexible, forgiving. You pluck one, not to eat, just to hold. Just to remember that even the man who claims he can judge everyone needs a leaf to face the morning. The courage isn't in the herb. It's in the plucking. It's in the ritual. It's in the admitting that you're scared and doing it anyway, whether you're a pope or a person or a pigeon trying to decide which gap to fill. The leaf goes dry in your hand almost immediately, turning from purple to brown like a bruise healing. You put it in your pocket. It will crumble there, become dust, become part of your clothes, part of you. Years from now, someone will find a strange stain on your tunic and wonder what it was. You'll know. It was a moment of borrowed bravery. You leave the garden. The door closes. The rosemary smell lingers, following you down the unmapped stairs, through the painted door, back into the palace where men are arguing about clauses and kings, are sharpening swords and ravens are sleeping off their long flight north. Gregory is in his chambers, pacing, the taste of purple leaves still on his tongue. He's about to write a new clause, you can feel it. He's about to claim something else, something bigger, something that will need more than one leaf to swallow. The garden is quiet. The herb is growing. The bees hum their prayers. And the courage circulates on loan, waiting for the next hand that needs to be steady enough to change the world while shaking. The chapel is darker than a cardinal's sense of humor, which is saying something, because those guys can be bleak when they're not wearing the funny hats. You've wandered in here by accident, looking for the privy, finding God instead, which is a navigation error that happens more often than you'd think in the Lateran. The door is heavy oak, banded with iron that's been blackened by centuries of anxious handprints. It closes behind you with a click that sounds like the lock on a confession booth. Inside, the darkness has weight. It presses against your eyes like a blindfold made of stone. The chapel is small, a side chapel, the kind that gets used for storage when there aren't enough priests to fill it. The altar is a slab of marble that's been chipped by clumsy chalices and stained by wine that turned to vinegar somewhere around the time of Pope John Roman XI goat scandal. There's a single candle burning, which is less a light source and more a placeholder for illumination. It's been placed in front of a statue of St. Peter, who is holding his keys and looking like he's forgotten which one opens what. The flame is so still it might be painted on. You're about to leave when you hear it. A mumble, not a prayer exactly. More like someone practicing a speech in the shower, except the shower is a darkened chapel, and the speech is a list of reasons why one man should be able to tell every other man what to do. It's Latin, but it's hesitant, the kind of Latin that trips over its own declensions. Quod salus, Romanus pontifex. The voice is young. Too young for this document, too young for the weight it carries. It belongs to a priest who looks like he's barely old enough to shave his tonsure. He's kneeling in the front row, which is just a stone bench that's been worn concave by prayer. His hands are clasped, but his knuckles are white, which means he's not praying, he's bracing. He's reading from a scrap of parchment that's smaller than his palm, a microscope special, the words so tiny they're more suggestion than text. He squints at it. Quod salus. He stops, sighs. Starts again. Quod salus Romanus. It's the Protestant work ethic clause, the one that says the Pope can do everything alone. The young priest sounds like he's trying to convince himself that alone is a good thing. The historical grounding is this: priests had to learn the Dictatus. They had to recite it in masses, in synods, in confessionals when someone asked, "Can the Pope really do that?" They had to be the local franchises of papal power, the guys on the ground explaining to farmers that, yes, the Pope can release you from your oath to Lord Whatsit, but no, he can't make your crops grow faster. It was a tough sell. This priest is practicing his pitch in the dark, because practicing in daylight would mean people could see his face while he lied. The acoustics are strange. The chapel is a stone box, and his whisper bounces off the walls like a pinball of piety. You hear each word twice, once as he says it, once as the chapel gives it back, changed. Pontifex becomes pontifex, ex, an echo that sounds like a question. Depona becomes depona, air, like the verb is stumbling downstairs. The effect is that he's arguing with himself, and the chapel is on his side. The unusual detail is the crack in the wall. It's behind the statue of Peter, a hairline fracture that runs from the base of the altar to the ceiling. It's been there for centuries, but it's new enough that the stonemasons haven't gotten around to blaming it on the Arians. It whistles. Every time the wind outside shifts, the crack sings a thin, high note, like a choir boy who's been kicked in the cassock. The note changes depending on the weather. Tonight, it's in a flat. The priest's voice is a C-sharp. Together, they make a chord that is both holy and profoundly unsettling, like a hymn sung by ghosts who aren't sure they believe in the afterlife. The priest stops. He looks at the candle. He looks at the keys in Peter's stone hands. He looks at the crack. He says very quietly in Italian so rough it still has splinters, "Dio, si tu non sei d'accordo, familo sapere. Subito." God, if you don't agree, let me know. Immediately, he waits. The crack whistles. The candle doesn't flicker. God apparently is busy. He goes back to the parchment. Quad Papa, he trails off. He's at clause 21, the one about the Pope's decisions being unchangeable. He reads it like it's a question he's asking the darkness. Quad Papa. The echo gives him nothing. He tries again. Quad Papa EU Ducatus. The words taste wrong. You can see it in his face, the way his mouth twists around EU Ducatus, judged. He's a man who's been taught that God is the judge, that Christ is the judge, that the last judgment is a real thing with fire and seating arrangements. And here he is, saying the Pope can't be judged by anyone. Ever. The mystery is simple and terrifying. Does he believe it? Does he think in his heart that Gregory or any man is above judgment? Or is he reciting it because it's his job, because the parchment says so, because if he doesn't, he'll be transferred to Ancira where the carpets are thin and the winters are thick? The chapel doesn't answer. The crack whistles. The candle burns down another millimeter. He keeps going. Clause 22. Clause 23. He's speed running now, trying to get through before his mind catches up with his mouth. He's at 24, about the Pope's power to absolve subjects from their loyalty to the wicked when he stumbles. Not on the Latin, on the concept. A subditus, he says and stops. From subjects, from your subjects, from the people who swear to you, work for you, fight for you. The Pope can take them away. He can whisper a word and your army becomes his, your peasants become his, your wife becomes his if he decides she's been wicked enough. The young priest looks at his hands. They're shaking. He clasps them tighter, which just makes the shaking move up his arms into his shoulders. He's having a crisis of faith, and he's doing it on company time. The sudden detail is the draft. It comes from nowhere, a cold breath that makes the candle flame dip and dance like it's trying to avoid being noticed. The draft is smelling of the outside, of the Tiber, of the mud in the Forum, of the Alpine passes that Henry will soon walk. It's the world intruding, reminding him that these clauses aren't just words on parchment. They're weather, they're geography. They're the cold that makes your toes fall off. He feels it. He shivers. He looks at the statue of Peter, at the keys that can lock and unlock heaven, and he says, "Perche noi." Why us? Why the Pope? Why these clauses? Why now? The echo gives him nothing. The crack whistles a lower note, a G minor, the saddest of all keys. The candle gutters but stays lit, because candles in chapels are stubborn, like mules, like popes, like young priests who are trying to believe in something that sounds, frankly, unbelievable. He stands. He's finished. He's mumbled all 27 clauses, or maybe 26, because even in the dark he might have skipped the one that's too hard to swallow. He genuflects, but it's rushed, like he's late for an appointment. He crosses himself. He turns. He sees you. He doesn't scream. He doesn't gasp. He just looks at you with eyes that are older than his face, and he says, "Ha senso." Does it make sense? You could answer. You could say no. You could say yes. You could say that sense is not the point, that power is the point, that the clauses are a spell cast in Latin to keep kings in their place. But you don't. You just shake your head, a tiny motion that the candle turns into a dance of shadows on the wall. He nods. That's enough. He walks past you, his parchment clutched in his hand like a ticket he's not sure will get him into heaven. He smells of incense and fear and the courage herb, which means he's been to the garden. He's been borrowing bravery. He's been trying to grow his own. The door opens. The light from the corridor is harsh. He steps into it and becomes a silhouette, a cutout of a priest against a backdrop of Rome at night. Then he's gone and the door closes and you're alone with the echo and the crack and the candle that's finally decided to die. It gutters. It goes out. The darkness is complete. The chapel is just stone and air and the memory of a prayer that might not have been a prayer at all. You stand there in the dark, and you listen to the silence. It's not empty. It's full of all the clauses that were never said, all the questions that were never asked, all the doubts that have been scraped away but still leave a scar. The crack whistles one last time. It's an E minor now, the chord of unfinished business. Then the wind stops and the chapel is still. You leave. The door is heavier on the way out. The corridor is brighter. The world is still arguing about who gets to be in charge. But in that chapel in the dark, for one moment, a young priest asked God if it all made sense, and God didn't answer, and the silence was the truest thing you've heard all week. The Tiber moves like a snake that's eaten a library, slow, satisfied, full of words it will never digest. You're standing on the banks, watching it flow past the Castel Sant'Angelo, which used to be Hadrian's tomb before it became a papal fortress, before it became a tourist attraction, before it became this, a dark shape against a darker sky, a question mark made of stone. The river doesn't care about any of that. It cares about gravity, and the sea, which is a kind of humility popes could learn from. Autumn has arrived officially, which means the leaves are falling with the enthusiasm of people who have been waiting all year to quit their jobs. They're mostly plain tree leaves, big as dinner plates, yellow as old parchment. They land on the water and float like tiny manuscripts, each one a page from the book of the city that no one will ever read. Some of them have words written on them. Crushed insects leave patterns that look like letters. Bird droppings form punctuation. The Tiber collects them all, the sacred and the profane, the papal letters and the grocery lists, the seals of beeswax and the seals of sea creatures that have given up on life and washed ashore. A small boat is being poled upstream by a man who sings a song that is mostly vowels and complaints about his back. He's carrying something in the bow, a leather satchel, waxed, sealed, official. Another copy of the Dictatus, off to some bishop in Gaul who has been avoiding Rome's messengers by pretending to be dead. The boatman doesn't know what he's carrying. He thinks it's a tax assessment. He's not wrong, just imprecise. The unusual detail is the sound. The Tiber makes a noise like a very old man clearing his throat before delivering bad news, a low, wet rumble that vibrates through the stones under your feet. It's the sound of water moving through a city that has been built on top of itself so many times that the river has forgotten what the original banks looked like. But underneath that, there's a hum. It's the same hum that the seal made, that the bees made, that the courage herb made. It's the frequency of power being dissolved, because that's what's happening. The temporal power, the thing Gregory claimed in 27 clauses, is dissolving into starlight. You can see it. The stars are coming out one by one, not in a rush, but with the patience of people who know they have eternity. They reflect on the water, each one a tiny, distant sun that the Tiber carries away. The Pope can claim dominion over the earth, but the sky is still free. The river is still free. The stars don't answer to Rome. A leaf floats by with a piece of wax stuck to it. A seal broken, half melted by the sun, spat out by the river like a pit. You fish it out. It's the color of the Lateran bees, that specific gold. The imprint is still there, Peter, fishing. But the edges are soft, worn by water. The power is leaking out. This seal was pressed in July when the weather was hot and Gregory's hand was steady. Now it's October, the seal is in your hand, and it's a piece of trash that smells like fish. That's how fast it happens. The mystery is what endures, not the wax, not the parchment, which will rot if it gets wet or burn if it gets dry, not the words, which will change meaning every time they're translated, memorized, laughed at in a Constantinople scriptorium. What endures is the river. What endures is the mule that sat by the well for so long it became a landmark. What endures is the crack in the chapel wall that whistles in G minor. What endures is the question the young priest asked in the dark. Does it make sense? The boatman passes, going downstream now, his work done. He nods at you. His boat is empty. The satchel has been delivered to a messenger on the far bank, a man on a horse who will ride north, toward the Alps, toward Henry, toward the future that is already crumbling like old cheese. The rider's cloak is red. In the starlight, it looks black. You walk along the river. The stones are slick with algae that's been here since the Etruscans. The Tiber was a god once. People threw things into it, coins, prayers, unwanted babies. Now they throw in letters from popes. The river has become a mail service for the divine, delivering messages that no one asked for to a sea that doesn't read. A leaf touches your shoe. It's wet. On it, in the pattern of insect bites, you can see clause 12. Depona. To depose. The leaf is deposing its connection to the tree. The river is deposing the leaf to the sea. The sea will decompose the leaf into something else, something that will become part of a fish, which will be caught by a fisherman, which will be eaten by a bishop, who will go on to write a commentary on the Dectatus that will be stored in an archive and nibbled by mice who don't care about power, only protein. The circle is complete. It's a terrible circle. It's a beautiful circle. It's a circle that doesn't need a pope to draw it. The ravens are asleep. You can see them on the roof of the Lateran, huddled against the chill, their beaks tucked under their wings. They flew north with messages of absolute power. They flew back with exhaustion and a few missing tail feathers. One of them, you notice, is perched on the head of a statue of Emperor Constantine. The statue's nose fell off a century ago. The raven doesn't mind. It's using the hollow as a cup holder. The city is quiet. The arguing is over for the day. The synods are closed, the markets are shut, the spies have gone to bed. Rome exhales, a breath that smells like wet stone and old wine and the courage herb which is still growing in its pot, still being plucked, still being chewed by a man who can't sleep because he's too busy rewriting the rules of the world. Your own journey is ending. You can feel it. The Tiber is pulling you downstream, not physically but spiritually. It's time to go home. Wherever that is, whenever that is. The river doesn't care about your timeline. It flows to the sea, and the sea flows to the sky, and the sky is full of stars that are already dead but still shining, which is the best metaphor for papal power you've encountered yet. You take one last look at the water. Something floats past. A piece of parchment, waterlogged, the ink running like tears. You can't read it. The words have dissolved into the river, become part of the hum, part of the flow, part of the thing that endures by letting go. The wind picks up, carrying the smell of rosemary from the garden, sharp and clean. It mixes with the river smell, the death and life smell, the smell of documents that have become compost for the next season's growth. You breathe it in. It smells like an ending. It smells like a beginning. It smells like sleep. The stars gather overhead. They're not arranged in constellations anymore. They're just points of light, random, indifferent. They don't tell stories. They don't claim power. They just are. The river, the mule, the bees, the herb, they all just are. And for the first time since you arrived, you feel like you can just be too. You turn away from the Tiber. The hum follows you for a few steps, then fades, absorbed into the city's breathing, into the night's quiet, into the fan's soft whir that's been waiting for you all along. Each breath is slower now, the night leaning closer, its weight a blanket that no longer scratches. You are safe. There's nothing left to do tonight. The Tiber flows without you, the bees make wax without you, the Pope paces without you, and the world continues its slow, stubborn turn. The ravens have landed. The mule has settled. The gap in the parchment has been filled by silence, which is its own kind of answer. Imagine the candlelight fading, not with a puff but with a sigh, the flame sinking into the wax the way memories sink into sleep. The river's hum becomes the fan's hum, becomes the sound of your own heart, steady and soft, and not asking questions anymore. The rosemary scent dissolves into the clean smell of sheets, the courage herb into the warmth of the pillow where your head rests. The courage you borrowed has been returned, with interest paid in dreams. Picture the stars overhead, not the Roman stars, not the stars that watched an emperor walk barefoot through snow, but your stars, the ones outside your window, gathering like quiet friends who have come to sit with you a while. They don't claim power. They don't judge. They just shine, which is a kind of prayer, which is a kind of peace. Let the tension go. Let the questions go. They'll be there in the morning or they won't, and either way, the morning is not your problem yet. Right now, there is only this, the slow breath in, the slower breath out, the darkness that holds you like the Tiber holds its leaves, carrying you somewhere you don't need to understand to trust. The story is over. You've walked through palaces and markets, through gardens and chapels, through the alpine mud of tomorrow and the Roman dust of yesterday. You've held power in your hand and felt it warm and humming. You've watched it dissolve in river water. You've earned rest, so rest. The fan turns. The night deepens. The world hums. And you are part of that hum, a single note in the long song that needs nothing more from you tonight. Sweet dreams.